The day arrived when the friends had to separate. The day was beautiful, although a tremendous cry attracted everyone's attention. Calyx didn't understand why Leo was crying so much, if they were only separating for a few years. The impressionable Oscar also shed a tear and begged the boy to write them letters often. The prince of the Roseville Empire hugged Leo and tried to calm him down. Romeo hated moments with a depressing atmosphere. Rio looked at his friends, but he couldn't stop crying. The problem was that Rio knew the future and understood that he would probably never see his friends again. At 8 years old, the crown prince almost drowned, but right at that moment, he recovered his memories of his past life. The protagonist in her past life was terminally ill and often read romance novels in the hospital. The girl also played a lot and eagerly hoped that, after dying, she would be reborn as a character in a video game. Someone heard her and she reincarnated, but not as the protagonist, but as a character from the novel. She got the supporting role of Relia, whose mother was a princess who had already passed away. According to the plot, the temple selected the princes to prepare them for the dragon, but an imposter went in place of Rio. The true Rio's fate was tragic, as he died as soon as the heroine's stepfather ascended the throne. Relia returned from the temple years later and died almost instantly, tripping and falling into a pond. The heroine did not want to die like that. She had just gotten a new life. The young woman tried to interact as little as possible with the novel's characters, and she hid her true identity. But in the end, she became friends with all the heirs, and one day their paths separated. The heroine returned to the country where her character was born, while her friends had already defeated the dragon. Her feat was great, but the heroine had to solve her own problems, not admire others. One day, a boy stopped her on the street, convinced that Raelia had killed his friend. The question shocked the protagonist, who hadn't seen any of her friends in a long time. It turned out that the rumor spread that the crown prince's killer was living peacefully as a princess. Apparently, all her friends believed it. They hated her and wanted revenge on the prince. Each of them wanted to know why the girl Raelia, or the boy Rio, killed the former crown prince. The protagonist's personal problems did not affect the city's atmosphere at all. Everywhere, the joy of the inhabitants could be heard, celebrating the victory over the dragon. The story of 4 heroes who reunited after 6 years of absence resonated at every tavern table. But the heroes themselves were not planning any cheerful party at that moment. One of them, right now, was sitting alone in his castle. The newcomer's voice caught the thoughtful boy's attention. The blonde thought that drinking alone was a rather sad activity. The short-haired man knew that no alcohol would make them forget what happened. The castle owner asked the blonde how the magical tracking was going. They were still hoping to find clues, even though many years had passed. All those years, the heroes waited to track down who killed their loved one. The blonde understood his companion, but didn't know how to support him further. The boy's gaze stopped on a suitcase with folded clothes and a stuffed rabbit. He knew instantly whose suitcase it was, and the pain hit his heart. Meanwhile, another hero did not lose hope of finding the killer. Calyx was determined. He felt that this time he would succeed. Superion once again asked him to be careful and not take risks. He begged Calyx to contact him no matter what happened. He wanted to help his friend. In the end, he thanked Calyx again for the opportunity to fight together on the team. Superion hoped to one day introduce his niece to the hero. The hero made it clear that he did not want to meet the girl. Superion could only say goodbye. After a few moments, the hero was left alone on the street. Completely alone. Although the boy saved the world, chaos raged in his soul as he could not save his friend. Oscar in the castle felt no joy either. Once again, he admitted to himself that he missed Rio very much. He approached the armchair and looked at the toy with annoyance. Picking up the stuffed rabbit, he felt the pain of loss again. Looking at the rabbit, he promised that very soon he would find who killed his friend. Oscar decided that he would take revenge on the killer with his own hands. Actually, this story originally had a completely different ending. The book about a group of hero friends was called Team of Conquest of the White Dragon. The protagonist bought a copy of the story on a clear day at the book fair. She hurried to open the new release and immediately noticed that something was wrong with the plot. The drawings of the main characters were not at all like she imagined them. The plot itself seemed absurd to her. The girl understood well the suffering those heroes went through. The only thing she wanted now was to see them, even if only one more time. The sound of a sword pulled her out of her memories, along with the accusation of having killed his friend. It turned out that all her friends were convinced of her guilt in Rio's death. The gaze of each of them was forever etched in the protagonist's mind. The four heroes, with whom she had forged bonds, hated her fervently. The only thing they longed for was to witness the girl's death as soon as possible. And now they had finally found her, and they were ready to take revenge for the murder. Terrified, the young woman began to insist that these rumors were pure lies. She desperately wanted to tell the truth, but something prevented her. A voice in her head kept repeating that the person with whom she shared memories no longer existed. The girl understood that the end of her story was coming. She closed her eyes. She felt fear and pain at the same time, as her childhood friends would kill her. In the sacred neutral zone, Prince Rio fell into the lake. One of his friends noticed. The quick reaction of the boy prevented the tragedy and pulled the crown prince out of the water. The blonde shouted at the servants to act quickly. Rio had swallowed a lot of water. The adults immediately conjured a magic circle and directed it toward the boy. After a few moments, the boy began to cough. His lungs were freed from the water. The servant noticed that, inexplicably, Rio's body temperature still hadn't returned to normal. Opening his eyes, Rio heard that they wanted to take him to a shop. He immediately replied that he was fine and didn't need help. The boy sat down and begged to be left alone. Finally settled in the warm bath, Ray tried to calm down, repeatedly repeating that everything was fine, that everything was in order. He was still in shock and feared any sudden sound or movement near him. Rio hoped not to die, since no one had witnessed anything. The protagonist felt extreme tiredness and, for some reason, was still cold. Memories of the hospital flooded her, where pain and loneliness accompanied her. The heroine had so little strength that she could barely do anything, and reading romance novels was starting to tire her. Lately, she spent more time on her phone, playing all sorts of games. The brunette enthusiastically bought ingredients in virtual shops and created medicines there. In one of the latest games, the protagonist created medicines to cure a young villager. Games were a perfect escape. There the heroine could do whatever she wanted. She collected treasures happily. At least in games, she could indulge all her desires. In those moments, she forgot how hard her situation was in the real world. While playing, she forgot she was a terminally ill person waiting for the day of her death. With each passing day, she dreamed more about entering the game after dying. And at that moment, she was furious because her wish had come true in the worst way. No doubt, she was happy to have reincarnated, but she hadn't entered the supposed game. The girl realized that she had been transported to the world of a romance novel. What terrified her most was the face of the character reflected in the mirror. A chill ran down her spine as she realized she was in the body of Relia Aurelia. The voices of the servants, anxious about the crown prince, pulled the heroine out of her horror. Afraid to enter, they asked if Rio was all right. With the calmest voice he could manage, the boy replied that everything was in order. Once the servants left, the heroine exhaled with difficulty. The girl understood that, once again, she had been on the verge of death and only survived thanks to the priest's magic. Thoughts of death flooded her again with chills and fear. She had obtained the body of a secondary character, so she knew little about Relia. The heroine didn't know what, for example, that mark on her hand meant. At the same time, the girl felt total powerlessness. She didn't want to live another meaningless life. Currently, Rydios is in charge of the Aurelia Empire, with a sister, Iris, who according to the story died 7 years ago. In life, Iris fell in love with a simple knight and had a daughter with him. Due to the chaos in the empire and the struggle for the throne, they simply forgot about Relia. In the end, the character spent her entire childhood in a small tower on the outskirts of the castle. All Relia had were ragged clothes and a few maids. It was only thanks to them that she did not die of hunger. They were hard years, but they were also the quietest years in the girl's life. Everything changed the day Emperor Rydios summoned the young woman to his presence. Rydios spoke openly about how foolish it had been for his sister to have a child. At the same time, the emperor acted as if he were very happy that Relia was now in front of him. He learned from the maids that, apart from them, no one knew of the young woman's existence. The emperor, satisfied with the answer, stood up abruptly and took Relia's hand. He stated that on her hand was a blood oath mark that proved her royal lineage. Rydios also pointed out that the girl was approximately the same age as Prince Rio. Immediately after, he ordered his servant to murder all the maids. He continued explaining that, in the past, 5 knights defeated a dragon and saved the world. Later, each of those knights founded their own empire. When the dragon awakens again, the knights with the blood oath must answer the church's call. Many years have passed since then, and a dragon egg has reappeared in the world. It was impossible to destroy that egg, and a dark magic was brewing around it. Because of this, the beasts have awakened again, and restlessness grips everyone. The church decreed that the descendants of the emperors must train in the temple and kill the dragon. Thus, this quintet became the new hope of humanity. After these words, the emperor called the children idiots and brandished his sword. Rydios observed that now nothing prevented him from ascending the throne, as he had gotten rid of the thorn. He didn't want to send his only son to the temple, as there he could be killed by competitors as well as by the temple servants. Ending his story, the emperor asked if the young woman had understood his story. By then, her hair was short, and she still looked at Rydios with fear. He concluded the story by saying that, from that moment on, she would take her son Rio's place in the temple. Recalling all this, the heroine began to beat the bed, indignant at how horrible the emperor was. Memories of delicious food calmed the torrent of negative thoughts in the girl somewhat. She understood that the novel's heroine had no choice but to accept Rydios's demands. If the emperor hadn't taken advantage of the girl, there was no guarantee she would have survived at that moment. The heroine decided she must start thinking positively and focus on her knowledge of this story. If nothing changes, Relia's life will end by falling into the royal pond. How horrible. This means that, while the girl is studying at the temple, she will be completely safe. Asking others for help was dangerous, as no one knows Relia's secret. The risk is enormous. She felt a chill, realizing the conditions she was in. If Relia makes a mistake, the magic of the emperor's golden word will activate, and she will die instantly. All this reminded her very much of her life in the hospital. It seems nothing has really changed. It hurt her to have to wait for her death due to someone else's whim. Even in this new life, gathering strength, the girl swore that this time she would avoid the fate she already knew. She became Relia at the age of 7, so she still had time to change everything. She just had to avoid the novel's protagonists and not die drowned in the pond. But first, she needed to survive at the temple for the next 3 years. No one must suspect that she was an imposter, a false king. Full of enthusiasm, she headed to the place where the future heroes rested. Meanwhile, one of the crown princes was already watching her secretly. The Kreutz temple not only trained the chosen heirs to the throne, it also hosted many children of nobles from different countries. The protagonist thought that this way, the nobles reinforced ties with future allies from important families. This place, compared to the hospital, was a true paradise for the young woman. What attracted her most was the dining hall. With abundant, delicious food at any time, Relia heard some girls say they couldn't get used to the schedule or the cuisine. They complained among themselves that it was forbidden to bring servants along. The girls also lamented that wearing the same uniform every day was exhausting. Relia found her clothes comfortable, especially compared to what the character wore before. The small difficulty for the heroine was that in the novel there was no information about life in that temple. That temple was mentioned only twice in the future, and also only as rumors. Absolutely nothing was known about how Relia spent 3 years of her life there. Since theoretically she will die in the royal pond, they reassured her. She will be safe at the temple. Her main mission is to remain unnoticed in this place. Still, the girl couldn't help wondering how it was possible to trip and drown in a royal pond. At least, thank heaven, they didn't murder her in the middle of nowhere. The heroine was pulled from her thoughts by a voice asking if she was all right. The boy's appearance, and so close, was too sudden. The smiling young man told her that he was the one who saved Ray yesterday. Staring intently at the heroine, the blonde repeated that he rescued her from drowning. The boy doubted that Ray knew about his feat, but she calmed him down and thanked him for the rescue. Immediately after, Relia carefully observed her new friend. This blonde was definitely handsome, and undoubtedly one of the heroes in Romeo Rossberry's story. He was one of the heroes who would defeat the dragon in the future. The girl remembered that, according to the plot, the boy possessed a noble and dignified character. The silence made Romeo tense. He asked Rio not to look at him like that and to say something already. Rio finally returned to reality and thanked Romeo again for saving him. It seemed a simple thank you was not enough for this blonde bombshell. He asked why the crown prince kept saying thank you so much as a sign of gratitude. Romeo assumed the heroine didn't know other words. Such brazen behavior was not at all associated with the image of the kind young man from the novel. Exhaling, Rio directly asked what Romeo wanted from him. Romeo wanted the heroine to cover him while he prayed in the temple. He expected Rio to report that Romeo fell asleep in his room and that no one should wake him. That request seemed too trivial to Relia. Romeo thought that if the crown prince told that legend to the monks, they would believe him without hesitation. The heroine didn't want to get involved, but she had to pay her savior somehow. So she agreed. The girl thought that the boy's true image was not as described. The heroine decided that while she was in the temple, she should eat as well as possible. Upon returning to her homeland, their problems with proper nutrition would start again. Romeo was curious to know if Rio had a symbol on the palm of his hand. After receiving an affirmative answer, the boy asked him to show it to confirm the authenticity of the mark. Relia was dying of curiosity to know what the blonde would say about her mark. Upon seeing a mark identical to his own, Romeo became convinced that all 5 heirs have it. At that moment, the attention of all the girls in the hall abruptly shifted towards someone. The protagonist was shocked again when she saw who all the gazes were directed at. It was Griffith Nicaea, and he seemed completely oblivious to everything happening around him. Romeo clearly did not get along with Griffith because he called him stupid and pathetic without hesitation. The girl sincerely did not understand how someone could dislike Griffith. Someday, this boy will become one of the most important heroes in the world. He will also be remembered as one of the youngest emperors in history. He will be considered the strongest among the heroes, although he had a very calm temperament. The girl did not know what relationship united Romeo and that guy in the temple, but it looked very bad. A second later, the protagonist spotted another figure who would be famous in the future. He stood out in the crowd because of his red eyes and silver hair. After a few moments, the protagonist recognized him. It was Oscar Hresbelg. In the future, this man would be remembered as a psychopath emperor. Romeo detected another person who got on his nerves. It was Calix Asgard, another member of the Empire who would also become a famous hero. The protagonist remembered Calix very well. He was the nephew of the Emperor of the Asgard Empire. He was the one who paid the highest price after the hunt for the Light Dragon. The protagonist felt that something was wrong. She was surrounded by the novel's protagonists. Relia remembered that Calix, at the end of the story, would marry the protagonist. Her childhood friend, Romeo, pulled the girl out of her thoughts, asking if she also hated those people. The heroine hesitated when answering, which Romeo did not like, since they are now friends. And they must hate everyone. The girl was stunned by that way of thinking, but tried to hide her emotions. She replied that she shared Romeo's opinion about those boys. Romeo considered that answer boring. The girl looked at her soup bowl. She couldn't forget her main goals. She would simply eat well and avoid this whole company of future heroes as much as possible. Relia definitely had to stay away from them to survive in this novel world. From now on, she will avoid any contact with the heirs of the empires. After lunch, the heroine decided to take a walk to explore the temple thoroughly. But she had to stop because she heard a child crying. It was Oscar, and suddenly he started crying buckets and as if trying to isolate himself from everyone. He repeated the word no incessantly, and tears kept running down his face. The boy tried to stop crying and calm down, but couldn't do it in any way. He heard his father's voice in his head, and it seemed to him that there was a huge bloody sword over him. The voice was indignant because Oscar had turned away his gaze from his dead mother. The voice demanded that the boy look into the eyes of the deceased mother. Such red eyes were a symbol of the spilled blood, according to the voice. Oscar still heard the voice. Now it called the boy a monster. The voice repeated over and over that the child was a true monster. The boy covered his ears just to not hear that voice. In the next instant, he realized his mother was calling him by name. At one point, the child's mom woke up and told him it hurt a lot. The woman's hand tried to reach the boy's face. Mom begged the boy to save her. She repeated it several times. Somewhere in the background, Oscar saw a hand that suddenly appeared in front of him. Immediately after, he heard a completely different voice. The face that appeared before him said that all those images in his head were just lies. Hands reached out to Oscar's face, telling him not to listen to the voice in his head. Oscar finally saw the boy's face in front of him. Ray asked him to look him straight in the eyes. Afterwards, the heroine told Oscar he needed to calm down. She added that he was now in a safe place. Ray added that the boy was in no danger and was completely safe. A little late, the monks ran towards Oscar, trying to understand what had happened. They approached the crown prince and asked him what had happened. The girl noticed the boy felt a bit better. Now she herself had calmed down and breathed deeply. In reality, the heroine felt very proud of herself, as she managed to pull Oscar out of that terrible vision. She felt sorry for this little boy, as she knew what he had seen. She watched silently as the monk took the crown prince away. His father murdered a lot of people in front of the boy, and his mother too. The father called Oscar monster because of the color of his eyes, and he suffered because of it his whole life, until the heroine said his eyes were beautiful. Then, the heroine concluded that getting rid of the inner monster was logical. In the novel, everything was simple, but seeing the little one suffer is terribly painful. Now the protagonist understood that Oscar's childhood was much harder than she thought. That's why, upon seeing the boy's attack, the heroine told the others to run and find priests. The young woman simply couldn't stand seeing the boy suffer. Only now did the heroine realize that, unintentionally, she had gotten involved in the story of one of the main characters. Romeo, who approached stealthily, frightened the girl by saying that she looked a lot like a heretic. The girl asked the boy why he didn't help, since he saw that Oscar needed help. Apparently, the boy didn't like the question and explained that falling into the pond and this situation are very different things. That answer did not convince the girl at all, but she decided not to answer the blonde anything. Instead, she just left, but Romeo apparently started chasing her. He asked about the spell Ray used, but the boy quickly replied that he was just trying to calm him down. Romeo didn't understand how one could calm a person possessed by a demon. In the novel's world, the understanding of common people was extremely limited. Anyone suffering from something invisible was considered possessed by a demon. Precisely for this reason, no one tried to help Oscar during his attack. Even the temple servants at some point began to suspect that Oscar was possessed. Perhaps this is what intensified Oscar's mental problems in the future. The heroine, with a professional air, explained to Romeo that demons do not exist. They are only consequences of past trauma. She compared Oscar's attack to the fears that arise during night terrors. Romeo disagreed with her conclusions and told her that her logic simply didn't work. He began to explain to her that, as the crown prince of Aurelia, Ray shouldn't behave like that. At that moment, Romeo seemed an extremely unpleasant guy to the heroine. She remembered that the adult Romeo was very kind and courteous to the protagonist. A second later, the girl remembered that Romeo also had psychological scars from the past. Oscar wanted to hear the rest of the story. Relia had to ask him what continuation he was referring to. She wanted to know more about people who have nightmares while awake. It seemed this topic really worried Romeo a lot. He asked the protagonist to tell him everything she knew about it. The girl interpreted the boy's fervor as simple curiosity. After all, in front of her was just another curious child. Relia tried to explain to him that the human mind is very fragile and therefore very unstable. And if an impactful scene happened in the past, the mind begins to replay it constantly. Finally, that scene stops being perceived as a memory and becomes reality. When Ray added that, because of that, many end up committing suicide, Romeo immediately exploded, considering it a great sin. He believed that suicides give their soul to the devil, which contradicts religion. And it is a sin. The girl only replied that there are people who can do nothing to prevent it. Romeo thought that the reason was that those people were possessed by a demon. Relia tried to explain to the blonde that constant visions prevented him from thinking clearly, and that's why they died. The protagonist understood why Romeo had become so interested in her words. He had seen his mother take her own life. She was forcibly hunted to gain power. Nobody cared about the young woman's feelings. She was lucky that the emperor really tried to love Romeo's mother. He didn't pressure her and simply waited for her to open her heart to him. The girl's parents went on to threaten her that if she didn't give birth to an heir, they would kill her true love. This allowed Romeo to be born. But the girl's parents continued to take advantage of her weakness. They used her beloved every time they wanted something. But the man in the dungeon committed suicide one day. He did it so that the empress would stop suffering and finally live free. The girl blamed herself for his death and sank into despair. She had hallucinations. In the end, she chose the same path as her beloved man. She couldn't imagine her son witnessing her end. In the castle, the rumor spread that the empress died because of a demon. The servants feared that Romeo would suffer the same fate. This devastated the boy, who grew up in an environment of love. Although the blonde did not suffer hallucinations like Oscar, the wound remained open. Romeo only confessed his fear of demons to the protagonist. The girl couldn't pretend to be ignorant of the young man's problems. She knew that the day would come when that wound would heal, without a doubt. She looked at her friend and decided to reassure him once more. Relia repeated again that demons do not exist. In the end, the heroine added that she completely believed in that. She pointed out that the pain is not caused by non-existent demons, but by real people. Apparently, those words also hurt the young man. He didn't know what to answer. He gathered his courage and finally decided to continue the conversation. Romeo was now convinced that Ray was a heretic. The heroine did not expect this outcome. Romeo was still sad, but still decided to explain his opinion. He thought that only a heretic could believe such things. Romeo added that if the monks had listened to the heroine, they would have called her a heretic instantly. With a threatening tone, Ray asked if Romeo had considered the consequences of his words. The heroine abruptly grabbed the boy by his clothes, frightening him greatly. She warned that no one should know anything about their conversation. If Romeo speaks up, Ray will kill him for real. She awaited the boy's response, who now felt terrible. The girl decided to make the hierarchy clear and thought about the best way to do it. The protagonist recalled one of the fragments from that novel. The hierarchy plan formed instantly, so she pushed the boy ostentatiously. After this, she said that from now on, Romeo must call her captain. Romeo was also unprepared for this. He didn't understand why the hell he had to call her that, if he took advantage of her weakness. With a confident face, the girl hinted that, at this rate, Romeo would become her enemy. It seems the intonation, the words, and her image had the desired effect. Romeo perhaps wanted to object to something, but he didn't dare. But he did not want, under any circumstances, to address Ray as captain. He promised he wouldn't tell anyone, but in return, he wanted to know more about demons. The boy wanted to know if it was true that people are not possessed when they act like Oscar did today. The girl agreed to tell Romeo what he still wanted to hear. After getting the desired yes, Romeo quietly thanked the girl, calling her captain. Finally, the incident was over, and the heroine could breathe easily. Now she didn't understand how the future hero ended up under her command. Meanwhile, Oscar had already regained consciousness and was just lying in his room. The monk wanted to know if the rumor that Crown Prince Rio had hit Oscar was true. The boy said it was true, wanting to add something more. But at those words, the priestess went into shock. How could the prince hit another prince? Oscar realized they had misunderstood him and tried to tell everything in more detail. He concentrated on his memories and on Rio's face. Now the boy was sure of one thing. Crown Prince Rio was trying to help him get out of his vision. The next morning, the protagonist ran into Romeo. She was still unsure if she had done the right thing by making him her subordinate. She was very puzzled that Romeo came to her room just to chat. It seemed too strange and careless on the blonde's part. Because of the hit, someone else decided to visit the Crown Prince in the morning. Rio expected Romeo to open the door. After all, he was his subordinate. The blonde looked at his captain, not understanding why she was looking at him like that. After a few seconds of silence, he closed the book with annoyance. He went to open the door, muttering that he had been interrupted at the best part. Seeing this, Relia realized she had gone too far with the subordinate status. Romeo was sure that some priest was coming to call for prayer. Upon seeing who was behind the door, the boy instantly became annoyed. The girl couldn't see who arrived, but Romeo was already rudely asking the guest his reason. Approaching the door, Relia saw that the guest was Oscar Hesbelk. Romeo asked the boy demandingly again why he had come. Oscar looked scared and didn't answer anything at all. Catching up to Romeo, Relia asked not to scare the guest, even if he had no reason. The blonde was still annoyed by the visit, but decided not to argue with the captain. Entering the room and sitting at the table, Oscar said he came to thank Ray for yesterday's help. Relia saw the boy's great blush and replied that there was nothing to thank for, that he should forget it. In reality, the protagonist wanted to pretend that nothing had happened from the beginning. She herself was slow to help, as she hesitated about how to act. The girl felt uncomfortable with the thanks and decided to change the subject, inviting Oscar to eat something. She decided to share the sweets, but it was a bit embarrassing since Romeo had brought them. It seems such generosity didn't please the blonde much. He got up from the sofa and approached Oscar to clarify some things. The blonde noticed that the boy, after the attack, had started to stutter suspiciously. The girl considered this behavior from the young man to be the height of tactlessness. Oscar tried to answer, seeing that a quarrel was starting because of him. The boy said he only stuttered when he got very, very nervous. That answer only enraged Romeo, and he started imitating Oscar. Relia couldn't take it anymore and demanded that the blonde stop behaving like that towards his friends. The crown prince got chills that Rio called Oscar a friend. The blonde pointed at the boy, asking how it was possible to consider him a friend. Then he reminded her that he had already told her he didn't like that guy. Rio's patience ran out. He stood up from the table and hit it hard. The captain's outburst of fury quickly stopped the provocative blonde. He turned abruptly and left the room. Judging by the slam of the door, the blonde was furious. The girl thought Romeo was a bit idiotic, but she didn't expect such a sudden exit. The heroine tried to calm down, repeating to herself that Romeo was just a child. So now she would have to apologize to Oscar on behalf of the blonde. Ray tried to explain that, in reality, Romeo is a good person, even if it's hard to believe. Oscar thought that all the previous dialogue was a lie, greatly surprising the heroine. Looking into the distance, Oscar pointed out that he had no friends. The boy believed that nobody could like a stutterer like him. Those words resonated painfully in Relia's heart. She took time to find an answer. The young woman felt that in front of her was still a child. Young children should not talk about themselves like that, and moreover, with such calmness. She tried to think carefully about an answer. Ray replied that Oscar could start being her friend, since yesterday he wanted to help him. The boy did not expect this proposition and looked carefully at the protagonist. He didn't believe that Ray would have helped him if he had known about his stuttering problem beforehand. The girl replied that she would have helped him in any case. No one had behaved like that towards the crown prince, so Oscar took time to answer. Gathering strength and still stuttering, he thanked Ray. After this, Oscar asked if Ray knew his name. Ray knew perfectly well, and so he instantly replied that he had in front of him the crown prince of the Hresbelk Empire. The heroine regretted attracting the attention of the novel's second protagonist, when she only wanted to live discreetly. The heroine was surprised by Oscar's question about why Romeo calls him captain. The girl lied and replied that Romeo saw how she was comforting Oscar, and that's why he started showing his respect that way. Upon hearing this, Oscar asked permission to also call Ray captain. The boy was visibly ashamed of his request, but repeated it anyway. It seems life in this place was getting stranger and stranger for the girl. She recalled a scene from the novel where Oscar avenges his mother's death on his father and becomes a bloodthirsty emperor. Then he promised his father that, from that moment on, everyone who crossed his path would fear him. With that memory in mind, the protagonist was a little scared of becoming Oscar's captain. Oscar, the boy misinterpreted the girl's doubts, thinking the indecision was due to yesterday's attack. When Ray replied that the attack had nothing to do with it, Oscar decided the reason was his stuttering. The protagonist sharply replied that the stuttering also had nothing to do with it. The word captain brought horrible memories and the sensation of a near death. But Oscar couldn't guess or discover the reason for this. To utter the next words, the heroine had to try hard, but she couldn't even say the words Oscar so desired. In the end, Oscar heard permission to call Ray captain if she wished it so much. His spirits instantly soared due to Ray's unexpected authorization. Calming down, the heroine added that Oscar could call Ray whatever he wanted. Relia attentively observed the cheerful crown prince. He was very happy, since until a second ago he thought Ray hated him. For the girl, such recognition was like discovering a new truth. After this, an uncomfortable silence settled between the boys. Because of this, Oscar thought the protagonist didn't like him. To deny it, the girl said that she liked Oscar very much. The boy calmed down, happy to know that someone liked him. It seemed that now, their conversation could be considered finished. The heroine worried, fearing their secret would be discovered, but now she was calmer. She noticed that both crown princes were very handsome, and Oscar looked like a fairy. Oscar declared that he would always count on his captain now. And so, without realizing it, the heroine was approaching the moment of the incident in the temple. Powerful enemies gathered to murder one of the crown princes. And right now, the assassin received the green light to execute the emperor's ruthless plan. The next morning, Romeo, in excellent spirits, caught up with Rio and asked if he had slept well. The blonde also wanted to know why Rio hadn't invited him to breakfast. This change in the blonde's behavior attracted the attention of other students. To top it off, another unexpected participant was about to join their group. Oscar also approached Relia and asked the captain if he had slept well. The boy clearly wasn't going to yield to Romeo and declared that he too would have breakfast with them. Romeo objected and said so openly, attracting even more attention from everyone present. The girl was horrified by what was happening, trying to understand how such a situation could have occurred. Reviewing the events of the last few days, the protagonist realized that she could only blame herself. The boys' voices pulled Relila out of her thoughts. They had been asking her a while ago It seemed they had agreed to look at Ray and worry about her silence. The girl looked at her sudden friends, not entirely deciding what to do with them. Relila replied that she was just hungry, and at that moment, Romeo remembered something. He remembered that an event would be held at the temple that night. Something like all students having to gather and do something. It was a tradition for children to overcome their fears of the dark. The entire group had to climb the mountain and conquer the fear of demons together. When the children reached the indicated place, they lit a purifying candle and returned. The climb up the mountain had to be done in pairs to conquer the fear of demons together. The monks warned that there was nothing to worry about, as there are only small animals on the mountain. Some accepted the challenge enthusiastically, but others were afraid to climb the mountain at night. Romeo asked the captain who he would go with. Ray replied that he would go alone, and that Oscar would accompany Romeo. Romeo didn't like it, while Oscar was willing to follow any order from the captain. In the end, the boys assumed they would have to work together. Before separating, Romeo asked the captain again if he was sure that demons did not exist. The girl replied that Romeo had no reason to worry, much less fear demons. Oscar cautiously added that he also didn't believe in demons or fear them. Romeo, with a panicked face, declared that he was not afraid of the loser Oscar. Rio asked why Romeo had that look of dread. The girl understood that Oscar did not fear demons because his father was much more terrifying. Demons hide in the darkness, but his father killed right in front of the boy. In that sense, Oscar was very similar to Relia's character. Darkness was always close to the girl, and what she feared most then was just one thing. She did not want to starve to death in the dungeon, where everyone had forgotten her. Romeo wanted to prove something to Oscar, but the boy completely didn't care what the blonde told him. The girl thought it was unnecessary to hide from the novel's characters, and felt they had become part of her life. Like true friends, she really didn't want to interfere in the events that were supposed to happen tonight. Because today on the mountain, there will be wolves with a single objective: to murder one of the crown princes. The heroine knew that if she told the monks this, no one would believe her. This meant that the girl had to stop the tragedy by herself. The two crown princes had been lost in the forest for some time, without finding the cabin. One of the boys concluded that they had gotten lost. He blamed the other for his lack of attention, which made them lose the right path. The second disagreed with the accusations. He believed he hadn't made a mistake. At that instant, the young man tripped on a tree root. He lost his balance and started to fall. The fall was terrible, and a sharp pain appeared in his ankle. To make matters worse, Alcair broke his lantern. This caused a fight between the boys. It will be harder to walk in the dark now without the lantern. Griffith thought Calix's excuses were complete nonsense. Calix was furious and was not going to tolerate insults directed at him. A few seconds later, the fight between the boys had already begun. Fortunately, it didn't last long, but unfortunately, the princes didn't completely calm down. Griffith, bruised, declared that they were now in a ridiculously stupid situation. They simply wasted valuable time and decided to separate in that place. Calix was sure he wasn't to blame for them getting lost. Seeing his friend walk away, Calix only shouted after him that Griffith was a coward. Now the protagonist learned something that the book told in a very superficial way. In the story, the adult Griffith said that they argued over a silly thing that day. The adult men regretted that incident which led to Calix being left alone in the forest. Only now did the boy understand that his fall hadn't been harmless. With a damaged ankle and without a lantern, it was impossible to reach the destination alone. He decided to stay there until morning to avoid getting lost or falling again. Suddenly, Calix heard a sound not far from where he was. At first, he thought Griffith was afraid to go alone and had returned for that reason. But turning around, he saw a glowing hand among the bushes. It was undoubtedly a creepy sight that could scare anyone. In the first seconds after seeing it, the boy froze in terror. Suddenly, the hand let him know that it wasn't Griffith. This scared Calix even more, and he already wanted to scream in fear. At that crucial moment, Relia realized she had gotten caught on a bush. She struggled hard to free herself from the bush that was trapping her. At that moment, she felt someone watching her intently. The girl barely turned when she saw Calix, jumping on her screaming that the demon must leave. The next second, the protagonist felt a strong kick in the back. A few seconds later, Calix realized that Crown Prince Rio was in front of him. Calix immediately added that he had seen Rio taking on the leader's role. Rio replied that, fortunately, Calix understood that there was no demon in front of him. The heroine suggested to the Crown Prince to get off the mountain as soon as possible. In Start Now, the boy didn't understand why Rio insisted so much on leaving that place. He deliberately fell to the ground, showing that he wasn't going anywhere. The young man thought that, in his condition, walking at night would be total madness. It would be best to stay in this place until the next morning. The heroine became furious with the prince, thinking he was ignorant and irresponsible. She had made this whole journey just to save him from the tragedy in which he would lose his hand. The girl thought she should tell the prince the truth about tonight. She affirmed that wolves would appear on the mountain tonight, and that was the pure truth. Of course, Calyx didn't believe a word of what the heroine was saying. Now it will be necessary to resort to the most extreme measures. A few moments later, the girl decided to ask a key question. She asked how much trust the crown prince had in his uncle. The question set Calyx off, who immediately jumped up and lunged at Relia. He called Ray a brat, and fury burned in Calyx's eyes. Calyx demanded that Ray immediately reveal who had sent him. The girl didn't understand why Calyx reacted so aggressively to the question. Ray showed her mark and reminded him that she was the crown prince of Auraria, and that's why the Emperor of Auraria sent her there. Apparently, the argument and the mark calmed the boy. At first, Calyx thought his uncle had sent Ray, but now it was obvious that it was impossible. Relia explained to the crown prince that she had very developed intuition. The Calyx Empire had long been devastated by the emperor's tyranny. The state demanded that everyone work exhaustingly, without giving them a chance for a happy life. Calyx considered his uncle part of the family, but to his uncle, Calyx was just a thorn. Because Calyx could claim the emperor's throne, his uncle wanted to take his life beforehand. Calyx understood that, according to Ray, the emperor would call wolves tonight to take his life. Ray said that was exactly right, even if it was hard to believe. Calyx just smiled in response. He didn't take Ray's words seriously. Afterwards, Calyx replied that in that case, he should simply take it and die today. It turns out the boy had long suspected that the emperor might want to kill him. So everything is fine, and the crown prince will die as his beloved uncle wants. After that, Calyx lay down on the ground and told Ray to get lost before the beasts appeared. Ignoring Relia, he added that this matter concerned only his family, so the prince from another country should leave immediately. The heroine couldn't abandon a boy who was facing death. The girl was unsure if her appearance in the novel had changed the main course of events. And now the crown prince could lose not only a hand, but also his life. Now the heroine will have to make another difficult decision, because she understood that. Beneath the bravado, Calyx hid a great fear. Seeing that Ray was not leaving under any circumstances, Calyx began to threaten him to leave that place as quickly as possible. Ray was going to leave anyway, regardless of whether they kicked him out or not. It seems that answer only increased Calyx's fear and anger. A few moments later, Relia clarified that she wouldn't leave that place alone. She asked Calyx to have a little patience. Seeing them approach him with a large club, Calyx got very scared. A second later, Calyx was already unconscious. The heroine was glad, as she didn't want to hit him several times. But an important flaw appeared in the heroine's plan. Calyx turned out to be much heavier than Relia had initially assumed. In addition to everything, the girl had no idea which direction to take. She decided to be guided by the moonlight and not deviate from the path, but she wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. The idea of not knowing the way due to the effect of magic on her terrified her. A few moments later, she heard movement in the nearby bushes. It sounded like a wolf, but it was a man, and he immediately asked Ray what she was doing there. It turned out to be Griffith, who came to meet her with a lit lantern. She didn't understand how he was there, since in the original story, he simply abandoned his friend that day. The protagonist introduced herself as the Crown Prince of Auraria. Griffith wanted to know why Ray was in that place. Relia said it was long and complicated to explain, and they didn't have time. Ray added that wolves would appear soon, but Griffith thought it was impossible. The protagonist repeated that they should leave the mountain as soon as possible. He could doubt later. Griffith noticed that all the paths were tangled. It was no surprise to her. She just hoped to find the exit. The boy didn't understand the strange behavior of the Crown Prince of Auraria. A second later, Griffith announced that he had already found the way. This news was both incredibly joyful and unexpectedly surprising. The boy pointed to the fireflies, thanks to which his lantern worked. The girl was amazed again, since according to the book, Griffith could see in the dark. It was an innate gift of the royal family. But in the novel, the boy abandoned his friend when he ran out of lantern. At that moment, Griffith asked why Ray was dragging Calyx. The girl explained that Calyx had fainted from fear. Apparently, the answer completely satisfied Griffith, as he considered Calyx an arrogant weakling. The girl decided that, although Griffith behaved rudely, he was still a good person for returning for Calyx. In the original story, these two boys never even crossed paths. It was pure chance. Faced with this idea, Relia let out a small laugh with the intonation of a villain who knows everything. The Crown Prince asked the girl not to laugh so strangely. It seems this Griffith is not, as the novel reader imagined him. Now she is even more convinced that this guy is reliable and a good person. Afterwards, the protagonist begged Griffith to show her the way out of there as soon as possible. Sighing, Griffith replied that they just had to follow the light of the fireflies. In the next instant, fear seized the girl. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a huge wolf appearing next to her. Griffith reacted quickly and tried to stand in front of Ray to protect the prince from the beast. But he wasn't fast enough, and the protagonist felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. Blood immediately began to drip. Panic completely overwhelmed her. But she wasn't going to leave Calyx and run away. A second later, Griffith, stunned by the wolves, was already in front of them. The wolves were acting very aggressively. The princes didn't understand how many enemies there were. It seemed the number of wolves increased every second. Griffith didn't understand how wolves could be in that forest. The girl tried to get Griffith's attention to help her. She needed him to blow his whistle, a whistle used by priests. In a firm voice, she added that he must do it as quickly as possible. Griffith looked intently, though briefly, at Crown Prince Ray. He was surprised that the wounded prince remained so calm and fearless. Ray's gaze overflowed with confidence and absolute control of the situation. But in reality, panic gripped her. Her legs wouldn't respond. She knew that, even after the whistle, the priests would take time to appear. Griffith ran towards Ray and blew the whistle. A slight hope arose. Just at that moment, someone was watching them, using magic as well. It was the assassin of the Crown Prince, and he understood that the children had called for help. Relia hoped this would cause panic, and the attackers would flee with the wolves. The whistle didn't last long, as one of the wolves jumped on the princes. Griffith withstood the blow with fortitude, interposing his staff. His swift reaction managed to stop the wolf's attack. At that moment, another wolf lunged at the boy. Griffith didn't manage to turn around, and the beast ended up biting the prince's arm. Events were unfolding very quickly. The heroine felt helpless. In the next instant, a magical glow suddenly emerged around Griffith. Relia saw that the boy was now right in the center of a magic circle. In the story, this power was supposed to manifest in the prince much later. It seems the stressful situation changed everything, and Griffith also seemed surprised by this awakening of power. At that moment, Calyx began to react and complain about the noise and the bright light. Upon opening his eyes, the Crown Prince couldn't understand what was happening. In front of him was Griffith, with his hand completely bloody, and moreover, near them was a pack of clearly aggressive wolves. Ray tried to calm the newly awakened Crown Prince, but Calyx immediately demanded to be let go, and he pushed the heroine away with a shove. He was much stronger than the girl, so he easily overcame her resistance. A second later, he was already standing on his own. Although it clearly hurt him, he looked at the wolves and made a decision in an instant. One of the wolves lunged at the boy and knocked him to the ground. The girl saw splashes of blood. She understood that Calyx would not get out alive now. The children could only watch as the wolf killed the prince. They couldn't do anything. In the original story, Calyx lost an arm, but managed to master a huge sword, and he played a crucial role in the battle against the dragon. But in exchange for victory, he paid too high a price. For this reason alone, the girl wanted to protect the future hero's hand. That was her only wish. She believed that Calyx died today only because of her poor preparation. Suddenly, the heroine heard Calyx's voice. He was still alive. He managed to push the wolf away, still trying to understand what was going on there. Relia saw that Calyx had a dagger in his hand, with which he defended himself from the wolf. She was amazed at how the prince could defeat the wolf with a simple dagger. After finishing off the wolf, he said his friends should have warned him that they were real. Relia thought he was an idiot. If she warned him about real wolves, Griffith thought they had more important tasks than arguing whether the wolves were real. Or not. They only got rid of a few. Most of the wolves were still alive. At that instant, the nearby mage activated a new spell. The next second, the wolves began to look and behave strangely. In just a few moments, all the remaining wolves turned into sand. Griffith saw everything, but could not understand what had just happened. The heroine replied that the attackers decided to destroy the evidence of what happened. Now Griffith was sure that someone was controlling the wolves without a doubt. The Crown Prince understood that the whistle must force the attackers to retreat. This time, Griffith was completely right, but she didn't want to confirm or deny his words. The only thing Griffith didn't understand was exactly who the attackers were hunting. Calyx was sure that this time, the mercenaries were coming for him. The magic that turns into sand is only used in his empire, and he had the proof of it right in his hand now. This meant only one thing for Crown Prince Calyx. His beloved uncle really tried to murder him today. The girl understood how disturbed the boy was right now. She wanted to console him somehow, but couldn't find the right words. The heroine understood that now she had to bring the boy back to reality. In reality, she was silently happy, since Calyx was still alive and hadn't lost his hand. Ray thought it still wasn't safe, so she told Calyx to get on her back. She repeated again that they had to get down the mountain as fast as possible. Griffith believed he was the one who should carry Calyx. Relia objected, since the boy had a large wound on his arm. Looking at Calyx, the girl added that she wouldn't have the strength to knock him out again. The boy was still angry with himself and the Emperor, although he was truly trying to calm down. While Ray was trying to get Calyx onto her back, Griffith, with a distant air, bandaged his hand. When Calyx finally got onto Ray, they could start the journey. Only now, Calyx noticed that his left ankle hurt from the fall, and now his right one too. It turned out that Ray had accidentally stepped on him after knocking out the Crown Prince. A moment ago, Griffin saw them both agonizing, exhausted, but now they looked like friends who had just had a good rest. This pair clearly became friends while the wolves were trying to eat them. The long-awaited morning arrived, but calm did not reign in the camp near the temple. The monks feared that the two crown princes had not yet returned. Romeo and Oscar added that Riech went up the mountain alone and hasn't returned either. Oscar was worried that something had happened to all the missing princes. Soon he spotted several figures in the distance. Oscar immediately recognized that one of them belonged to the captain. Relia looked very tired, and Prince Calyx was sleeping on her back. Upon realizing that the goal was met and the boys are safe, the heroine finally allows herself to rest. Everything looks blurry, but she understands that the monks have seen them. Just a few seconds later, the girl loses consciousness. The heroine hears a soft cry very close by and forces herself to open her eyes. Oscar's tearful face appeared in front of her, and he immediately asked if their captain was okay. The girl doesn't quite understand why Oscar is in front of her, crying. The boy replies that he is crying because their captain is suffering. Romeo explains that Relia is safe in the temple. After the captain woke up, Oscar decided to go look for a priest. Only now does the girl remember everything that happened and immediately asks about the others. Oscar replied that the crown princes are in a meeting with the priest, where they went after treatment. At that moment, the priestess arrived and asked about Ray's health status. Relia replied as quickly as she could that she was perfectly fine. She palpated the area of the wound and realized that it didn't hurt at all. This means that the wound in the abdomen had healed completely. The thought that her clothes were also intact made the protagonist tremble with fear. The priestess understood what the girl was feeling and why. When changing her clothes, it was impossible not to notice that she was a girl, not Prince Ray. Seeing the captain's sudden change in mood, Oscar worried about him again. The priestess whispered in Relia's ear that she herself had changed her, so she had nothing to worry about. Relia's secret will remain a mystery to everyone. The woman promised that she would not reveal her secret to anyone. That almost calmed the heroine. Although still a bit shaky, Ray had to calm her friends once more and assure them that she was fine. The girl barely caught her breath when new visitors arrived. It was Calyx and Griffith, who noticed that Ray seemed to be fine. Seeing the boys, the young woman felt real relief. She noticed that Griffith's hand was completely healed. Calyx was also unharmed, and most importantly, with both hands. At that moment, Relia felt like the happiest person. The four heroes gathered. And they are fine. They couldn't ask for anything more. Griffith believed it was imperative that Ray meet with the high priest. The boys planned to file a formal complaint against the temple for the incident. This turn of events was not ideal, so Ray didn't know how to react. And she was fully aware of the consequences that befell the temple and the heroes after the incident. The 5 empires from the original story were notified of the assassination attempt on Calyx, launching an exhaustive investigation. Because of this, the situation completely spun out of control, and Calyx's uncle tried to cover it up as quickly as possible. 5 kingdoms joined the temple and mobilized their warriors. Finally, the temple apologized to each empire and used warriors to significantly increase security. All this affected Calyx a lot, who was already suffering from the loss of his arm. In the original story, Calyx knew that his uncle planned to assassinate him, but the boy couldn't trust anyone, and that's why he was left completely alone. The other children began to avoid the future hero, as his life was in danger. Ray asked if anyone else knew what had happened in the mountains. If no one knows, then it's best that no one ever finds out. The boys didn't understand why Ray didn't want to inform the empires about what happened. Romeo and Oscar also didn't understand their captain's position. Ray looked intently at Calyx. The girl understood that he kept everything inside. In the original story, Calyx renounced royal power and became a mercenary king. And to think that now this hero is just a 10-year-old boy. To protect Calyx from trouble, this incident had to be silenced somehow. Griffith couldn't know, of course. That's why he didn't understand Ray's opposition. It was a simple, direct question, but the answer was terribly complicated. But the heroine came up with a solution. She said the problem was that if his father found out, they would have serious problems. Because Ray's father is very affectionate. He kisses her every day and doesn't sleep without hugging the prince. That description of the father left the princes in shock and horror. That is, she achieved the desired effect. If the father finds out, he will be furious. The princes understood the danger. Calyx said that, at first, he didn't plan to give the matter so much importance. If Calyx didn't object, Griffith wasn't going to make a scene either. But Romeo wouldn't shut up and shouted at the captain that he must have hit his head hard. Ray could have died. The blonde kept shouting. Now that the captain has no brain and the wolf bite made it worse, Relia couldn't stand her friend's tantrum anymore, so she screamed at him to shut up. This worked on Romeo, and he finally stopped shouting. A second later, Romeo declared that he couldn't oppose the stupid captain and turning around. He quickly left. Moments later, the door to Ray's room slammed shut. Relia was in shock due to the blonde's behavior, besides having a feeling of déjà vu. Oscar asked the captain to calm down, reminding him of Romeo's difficult but good nature. The boy pointed out that the captain should behave like an adult, not a child. Calyx and Griffith silently observed Ray's conversation with his friends. As soon as they had the chance, the boys asked why those princes called Ray captain. The girl explained that it wasn't a game, and that the boys decided to call her that. She couldn't do anything. The answer surprised the boys, who looked at each other in silence. Instantly, they became suspiciously happy, because they came up with a plan. Griffith announced that now they too wanted to call Ray captain. Relia got a chill hearing that, because it wasn't good at all. But the boys had already decided, and now they would be under the care of Captain Ray. Relia tried to make them change their minds, but it was useless. A few days later, the high priests came to see the boys and apologized personally for the incident. The temple servants promised to thoroughly investigate the attack and swore it would never happen again. Obviously, the investigation will lead to nothing, because the temple was in collusion with the Emperor of Asgard. Days later, Romeo demanded that no one enter his territory. Oscar tried to explain to the blonde that he was the one invading someone else's territory, always turning around. Griffith concluded that Romeo simply needed to buy another bed. Calyx was already fed up with everything. He just wanted this dispute to end soon so he could read. The whole situation seemed too unreal to the protagonist at this moment, because all these complaints and disputes were happening in Crown Prince Rai's bedroom. Relia didn't understand why all the heroes had brought their beds to her room, and they wanted Ray to sleep with them. In the end, the girl simply ran out of her own room. How could she possibly sleep now in a room full of crown princes? Just thinking about having to sleep with 4 heroes made Relia's head hurt. The heroine understood that she had greatly affected the course of history and didn't know what to do now. All she could do was hope that everything would turn out well and that they would never discover the truth about her. But even if everything goes perfectly, in 3 years the day will come that will mark the end of her great group. Not long ago, the protagonist began to notice strange looks directed at her. Relia heard the girls commenting on her status as captain, and that they even memorized her name as the Prince of Auraria. The girls were fascinated that this young man became a captain who united the crown princes. Apparently, with so much attention and always blushing students nearby, Ray will live the 3 years in the temple like this. One of the girls noticed that the prince was sitting alone, which was strange. She decided she had to seize the opportunity without fail and headed towards Ray. Upon approaching, She asked if it was true that the boy in front of her was the crown prince of the Auraria Empire. After hearing the confirmation, she moved even closer. She needed to talk to the boy. It turns out that the girl's father is Count Churds, and she is from the Nicaea Empire. But in reality, that name, like the empires, meant absolutely nothing to the protagonist. To avoid being rude, Raeliana smiled and asked what exactly she wanted from him. The Count's daughter did not expect such a direct question and was a little confused at first. After that moment, the girl, in an insecure voice, declared that she wanted to be closer to Ray. She pointed out that the prince usually only associated with boys. She was extremely impressed by the fact that his group called Raeliana captain. The protagonist didn't know how she should react to such words. In the end, Ray replied that it wasn't that important who called him one way or another. The girl didn't calm down, and Raeliana couldn't find a way to get rid of her quickly. The heroine understood that she was becoming more popular every day, and that was a total disaster. Relia wanted to hit someone right now, specifically whoever caused her popularity. That quartet of leech princes wouldn't let the heroine spend 3 quiet years in the temple. She remembered how those sleepy princes burst into her room almost every morning. In fact, that gang followed Relia everywhere. They never left her alone for a second. And at every step, they called her captain, which triggered such popularity among the girls. That's why Relia woke up earlier today. She desperately wanted to spend time alone, although it was impossible to completely isolate herself due to the constant gazes of adoration directed at her. Other members of Auraria never saw the real Rio, but the heroine knew the prince's reckless character. None of this mattered much, as they wouldn't be compared in the future. In the end, the girl is free to act as she sees fit. Right after her return from the temple, the emperor and the prince will die in a revolt. Relia couldn't think about what she would do during the rebellion, as the girl's voice interrupted her. It was obvious she wanted to ask Ray something, but she was embarrassed. It seemed that the girl found it very difficult to say what she wanted to know so much. Relia chose to encourage her and asked her not to hold back. The girl unintentionally let out a word and then took a deep breath. After this, quickly and loudly, she asked if Griffith had mentioned her in his conversations. Wow, that was a question the protagonist didn't expect at all. It turns out that Griffith was the fiancé of this blushing girl. The news was shocking. Now it was the protagonist's turn to be embarrassed. Composing herself, Relia replied that they weren't talking about her or any girl. Who knows how that strange conversation would end, but Rio heard familiar voices. The inseparable gang arrived at the dining hall, furious because the captain left without them. This time, Calyx was the most upset. Romeo hadn't even fully woken up yet. The girl was annoyed that those leeches had already gotten up and come there. Upon approaching, Griffith recognized a young woman next to the captain. The fiancé understood that her future husband was staring intently at her. She immediately turned and ran away, shouting that they should talk another day. The girl, red as a tomato, ran past the princes, fully waking up Romeo. Oscar felt enormous curiosity about the girl who ran past. Romeo assumed it could be the captain's girlfriend. Calyx doubted very much that the fleeing girl was his captain's girlfriend. He couldn't believe such a beauty would be interested in their leader. Oscar immediately explained to Calyx that their captain is the best and could have a girlfriend. Romeo added that, apparently, everyone except Calyx knew about the captain's popularity. The heroine could only sigh and accept her popularity and the idiocy of the princes. Oscar, sadly, asked if it was true that this girl was the captain's girlfriend. It seems this question worried the shyest of the princes a lot. The heroine immediately replied that he could not be the boyfriend. That would cause problems. The thing is, this girl is Crown Prince Griffith's fiancé. Calyx couldn't believe it. Seriously, Griffith already has a fiancé. Griffith calmly replied that everyone here should already have fiancés. Romeo, in shock, mumbled that he doesn't have one, nor does Oscar. The protagonist understood that the boys reacted badly to the fact that Griffith had a fiancé. She thought that only those whom the emperor hates don't have a fiancé. Romeo became curious. Does their leader have a fiancé? The question left her blocked. She had no idea how to answer. Romeo was sure that the captain has a fiancé. Of course, Relia still didn't know how to answer, and that could seem suspicious. The boys' curiosity was piqued. What girl could attract their captain's attention? Now, the whole table was burning with questions. Does the captain have a girlfriend? Relia had no idea how to answer the princes. What an awkward moment. The heroine didn't know if Ray had a fiancé. The book said nothing about it. She feared messing up and changing the course of history forever. In theory, Rio should have a fiancé. The emperor adored his son, but by sending her to the temple, Rio could become isolated and be left without a candidate. Relia devised a clever answer. They hadn't mentioned a fiancé yet due to her delicate health, but Rio had heard his father talking to someone about his future wife. Surprisingly, the princes swallowed their captain's evasion without hesitation, but Calyx doubted that the captain was weak. If she dragged him through the mountains, Rio explained that the situation was critical, and she didn't even understand how she managed to drag Calyx. And in reality, Calyx should thank her for that titanic effort for his rescue. Calyx started to get angry, while Romeo looked at the captain strangely. He wondered if Rio would save him if Romeo were in Calyx's place. Relia was surprised by the question. Romeo was her first friend in the temple. To calm the blonde, the heroine confirmed that she would also get him out of the mountain. Oscar immediately asked if the captain would also save him from that forest. Rio replied that Oscar was smaller and therefore, without a doubt, she would save him. The girl was satisfied with her answer, seeing a happy Oscar. The boy was happy that they wouldn't abandon him in the mountains with wolves. At that moment, Oscar seemed very similar to Adita to the heroine again. She thought Oscar had no right to be so adorable, and how it was possible that he was older than her. Relia thought that she probably felt something for Oscar, like for a younger brother. Noticing that she and the boy had the same hair color, the heroine decided to express her thoughts. She believed that strangers might think that Oscar and she were siblings. Those words were both unexpected and very pleasant for the boy. Calyx really disliked that pair starting to consider themselves older and younger brother. Such thoughts, in Calyx's opinion, could lead to a massacre between nations. Romeo thought that this time, their captain had clearly said too much. After the prince's reaction, she thought she had gone too far, but Oscar was happy. At that instant, the girl noticed something extremely important. Griffith had remained silent the whole time, without saying a single word. That boy was always the quietest in the group, truth be told. The girl thought the prince looked like a lost child at that moment. He always followed the group, but he was cold and distant, and that made Relia tense. It was urgent to change Griffith's situation in the group. She addressed the boy, who didn't expect to receive attention. The girl told him that she would have rescued him from the forest too if it were Calyx. The boy was surprised by the sentence, although he tried to hide it. Relia added that Griffith would never complain if they carried him on their backs. But before Griffith, Calyx reacted. Indignant about that insinuation, as soon as the altercation with Calyx ended, he noticed Griffith's face soften. Griffith replied that he hadn't asked anything. Relia changed the subject and offered food. Romeo didn't understand why the captain wanted to eat, since he had already eaten before coming. The boys never understood how the captain ate so much and where all that food fit. The rest of the day passed in a calm and peaceful atmosphere. While everyone slept soundly, Oscar had that recurring nightmare again. He woke up suddenly, fear gripping every fiber of his being. The boy couldn't recover, he couldn't even breathe normally. The child covered his face with his hands, trying to calm the internal tremor. He reviewed the captain's words in his mind, telling him that everything was fine and safe. This allowed Oscar to calm down a little, but he could no longer fall asleep. In complete silence, he hugged himself and, crying softly, asked his captain for help. But he was too far away and didn't hear him. The next day there were no classes, so the boys were discussing what to do during the day. Romeo proposed taking a walk outside the temple, since they were always locked between four walls. Calyx thought Romeo was suggesting a walk in the garden, but he was very wrong. Romeo, in fact, wanted to go to the shopping district in neutral territory, behind the temple. Griffith pointed out that although it was a bit far from the temple, it would be worth going there. The protagonist was not sure if the priests would allow the entire group to go out onto the street. It seems Romeo already had an action plan prepared for this. He reminded them that they kept quiet about the mountain attack, so the temple owed them their reputation. And Romeo wanted to take advantage of that, as now they had a reason to ask the temple for anything. The blonde believed they would be released and assigned escorts for their safety. The heroine loved the crown prince's proposal, as she knew nothing other than the tower and the temple, so as captain, she gave her consent for everyone to go together. Hearing this, Oscar's expression immediately changed. He clearly didn't like the idea at all. The boy, in an insecure voice, said he wanted to stay in the temple. Then he added that he was very sleepy, so the others should go without him. After saying this, he got up and headed straight for the exit of the common room. The protagonist understood why the prince didn't want to leave the temple. She knew that Oscar was always terrified of being in crowded places. She had to devise something quickly so the boy wouldn't feel abandoned. The idea of how to help Oscar formed instantly. It just remained to execute it. Romeo was irritated. He didn't understand why Oscar was rejecting this great opportunity to leave the temple. The protagonist interrupted the blonde, saying that if they were going, it had to be now. The blonde didn't understand why Rio wanted to leave so quickly after Oscar refused. In reality, Romeo was worried about the boy. He also didn't want to leave him alone. Seeing the blonde's reaction, Relia became even more convinced that Romeo was a great guy. Not much time had passed when the group arrived at the shopping district. There was an incredible number of people. Relia had never seen such a crowd since her transfer. Because of this, in the first few seconds, she even felt lost and didn't know where to go. Romeo noticed that this place didn't compare in size to the Rosemary commercial district. Calix was not enthusiastic either, and Griffith pointed out that at least this place was clean. Murmurs of discontent about the foreign nobles were heard everywhere. One of the escorts begged the princes not to stray far from the group. Relia thanked the guard for the warning and assured them they would be cautious. The temple assigned 5 knights as escort and only allowed them to walk in the area closest to the temple. The girl kept thinking. She wanted to buy something special in this place. In her search, the heroine examined the shop windows and found a suitable place. The princes wanted to know where their captain was walking, so fast and energetic. Upon seeing that the leader was heading towards the display case with dolls, they were extremely surprised. Meanwhile, the girl and then the whole company entered the toy store. The salesmen in the store immediately greeted the visitors. When the knights entered after the children, the salesman began to panic. Seeing that the knights were only accompanying them, the owner thought they were royal children. The knights apologized to the man for the sudden visit and reassured him. Relia approached the counter, where there were stuffed rabbits. She took one in her hands, although the girl understood the suspicion this might cause. But the rabbit was so adorable that the heroine couldn't take her eyes off it. Romeo didn't believe the captain was actually going to buy a doll. Only girls buy dolls. With a displeased look, Rio replied that boys can also want dolls. Romeo preferred not to argue, but Relia realized she didn't have money to buy a toy. It turned out that neither Calix nor Romeo carried money with them. What a tragedy. Romeo never thought that princes would need to carry something as mundane as money. With a glimmer of hope, Relia asked the last member of the group. Luckily, Griffith did have money, and Rio, euphoric, named him his most reliable subordinate. Griffith added that Rio could buy another doll if he wanted. Griffith would pay for everything. Griffith seemed embarrassed by the captain's compliments and simply asked them to choose quickly. Without hesitation, Relia took another identical rabbit, but of a different color. In the original story, the dolls featured 2 key moments. One about an adult Oscar who loved the protagonist, but he confessed too late. She rejected the prince and gave him a doll. She told him it was her favorite doll and that, as a sign of gratitude, she wanted to give it to Oscar. In reality, Juliana received dolls nonstop. Did she have so many that she gave them away left and right? Despite everything, the doll became very special to the prince. Thanks to it, Oscar managed to get rid of the nightmare that tormented him his whole life. Of course, the rabbit won't have the effect of the protagonist's gift, but Relia hoped it would help Oscar. Griffith, unlike the others, instantly grasped that the second rabbit was for Oscar. Calix and Romeo still didn't understand why the captain had 2 identical dolls. Upon learning about Oscar, Calix asked Griffith for money to buy an identical rabbit, but Griffith immediately refused the request from both Calix and Romeo. The princes felt very offended by the refusal and called Griffith rude. They expected that comment to affect the only one who had money on him. Romeo and Calix glared at the boy, remaining silent until he agreed. After finally getting an affirmative answer, they immediately ran to choose their dolls. The protagonist, once again, thought to herself that everything had gone terribly wrong. However, she felt a lot of warmth in her heart, knowing that she now had her own doll. She felt happy, as she now possessed something of her own, something that connected her to the boys. The girl didn't understand why she was so happy, if at first she only wanted to help Oscar. Perhaps the reason was that Relia's character had always dreamed of having her own doll. For some reason, the girl felt that as long as the doll was near, nothing bad would happen to her. The second episode, where the dolls appeared, directly involved Relia. The protagonist of the novel, Juliana, was loved by many characters in the story. However, she grew up in extremely unfavorable conditions. Her father constantly abused her. This would have continued her whole life if someone hadn't defended her. That someone was the one everyone thought was dead. His name was Perseus Aurelia, and he was the former emperor of Aurelia. The emperor was the victim of his younger brother's schemes and lost his wife and his throne. After this, he fled with the twin princes and hid for a long time. Juliana's mother married Perseus, and together they began to plan the reconquest of the throne. In a way, this marriage was an arrangement, and Juliana became the emperor's daughter. Perseus gathered old allies and overthrew his younger brother 10 years after losing the throne. By then, the real Rio had already been murdered by his subordinates. The emperor was not involved. Juliana, now a princess, enjoyed her new dream life and longed to get closer to Perseus. Perseus replaced her biological father, which is why the girl felt so drawn to him. But one day, this triggered an unexpected incident. Perseus rejected the protagonist, and she, startled by the surprise, fell to the ground. The emperor didn't want to scare the girl, but he did it unintentionally. Due to a sudden movement, Perseus hit the girl's hand. The wound caused a deep emotional scar, both on Juliana and on Perseus. After that incident, Juliana decided that her new father hated her. To fix it, Perseus bought the girl a huge toy. He handed it to her apologizing and explained that he was not used to physical contact. After giving her the teddy bear, Perseus begged Juliana to forgive him. The girl quickly accepted her father's apologies and calmed down. She was happy to know that her father didn't hate her, and the toy generated very warm feelings in Juliana. Seeing how happy the big bear made the girl, Perseus rediscovered Juliana. The same happened with her brothers, who watched from afar and fell in love with their sister. From then on, the brothers began to give the girl all sorts of toys. Meanwhile, Relia was not mentioned in the plot, as she did not influence it being a secondary character. She lived in a tower where even the sunlight didn't always reach. The emperor and his subjects couldn't decide what to do with the daughter of the one who overthrew Perseus from the throne. Some proposed killing Relia as a potential threat to the throne. Others wanted to marry her off for convenience. At one point, all that talk tired out the emperor who had returned. He then said he didn't want to hear anything more about that girl, but allowed her to live in the farthest tower. He wasn't even worried that his sister's daughter would starve all that time. He comforted himself by thinking that Relia's mother was a villain who tortured Elizabeth, Perseus's late wife. In the end, Juliana had everything, and she was also a kind and bright girl. Relia, on the other hand, was a gaunt and starving child who had never had anything. The young woman didn't even have the strength to hate, because she constantly only felt weakness and hunger. To avoid starving, Relia went to the forest behind the castle to look for fruit. Relia was the typical secondary character, without interesting traits. That day would have been insignificant if she hadn't met Juliana in the forest. In the clearing, after Juliana's picnic, a basket with food was left behind. The girl ran to the basket to grab what was inside. Looking inside, Relia saw many cookies and some fruit. She knew that if she took someone else's food, she could get into trouble. But hunger overcame her, and the girl reached out her hand towards a cookie. She quickly started devouring cookie after cookie. At one point, she heard a voice and fear gripped the girl. Relia didn't immediately notice that Juliana was sleeping soundly next to the basket. The princess was hugging a teddy bear. Seeing the princess, Relia felt fear at first, but the fear quickly faded. The girl's attention was captured by something that even made her forget the food. Relia felt an immense desire to take the teddy bear the girl was sleeping with away with her. She herself didn't fully understand how the thirst and desire to obtain that toy at any cost had awakened in her. The girl knew it was unforgivable, but her hand was already reaching for the coveted target. A second later, the bear was already in the hands of the, for the moment, secondary character. She wanted to hug the doll, even if only for a second, to feel at least a glimmer of warmth and love. Relia was hugging the doll and couldn't decide what to do next. In the end, hesitating, she took a few steps back. Immediately afterwards, the protagonist turned on her heel and ran away. Relia didn't manage to get far when two male voices called her. Seeing who was calling her, the girl knew serious trouble was coming. The boys thought the thief should be ashamed. She stole the princess's doll. One of the twins was left gaping at the thief's face. He realized that in front of him was the daughter of his aunt, the one who tortured his mother. The screams woke up Juliana, who discovered that Relia had her doll. The brothers wouldn't calm down. For them, What the girl did was a cardinal sin. Juliana begged them to calm down and not treat the girl with such arrogance. Looking at Relia, Juliana introduced herself and said that doll was very valuable to her. Therefore, the princess really wanted her doll back. Relia was ashamed of her action. She understood that she had behaved badly. She approached Juliana and returned the teddy bear to her. The girl sincerely thanked her for returning her favorite toy. The brothers thought that wasn't enough, so they didn't let Relia go so easily. They demanded that the protagonist approach, kneel down, and apologize. The young man asked Juliana to be patient, as she was a princess of the empire, and she had to be strict with thieves. The girl understood that she couldn't ignore such a blatant theft. Upon hearing the princess's consent, the brothers turned again to the thief. One of them declared that she had to bow her head and forced her to do so forcefully. Then, he added that she must apologize like that 100 times. The young woman felt even more insignificant than before. She started doing what they ordered, while tears streamed down her cheeks. Each time, the girl bowed and asked Her Highness for forgiveness. Relia didn't manage to apologize 100 times when the emperor approached them. The children were happy about the appearance of their father, who is usually almost always busy. He took his little daughter in his arms and carried her back to the castle, as it was nearing dinner time. The brothers called their father a cheater, as it was their turn to carry her today. Relia stopped bowing and looked at the emperor in silence. The man also looked at the girl in silence, with an indecipherable gaze. After this, he turned around and returned to the castle. The girl was left alone in the forest, with her thoughts and a deep loneliness. All these heroes of the story, like Relia's behavior, were clearly written within the framework of the script. But the current Relia contrasted enormously with the book's heroine. Meanwhile, the prince's company returned from the city and headed straight for Oscar. The boy tried not to show that he was sad, but he wasn't doing very well. Relia didn't wait and decided to give the gift to Oscar immediately. He took the rabbit, still not understanding what had just happened. Ray explained that he had decided to give a gift to Oscar. The crown prince was very surprised. The captain added that this doll has the ability to steal others' sadness. The princes thought their leader was talking nonsense again, as if he were a small child. Relia was horrified by those thoughts of the boys, so she reprimanded them since they all bought the same doll. It was a very accurate observation, to which the boys couldn't reply anything. Romeo was happy that now everyone had the same dolls. Relia remembered how little boys Romeo and Calyx whimpered in the store, saying they wanted the same dolls. Romeo tried to explain to the captain that they were all the same age, so calling them little boys was incorrect. After this, the day passed normally, and at night everyone went to bed without problems. Relia also went to bed, but she couldn't fall asleep in any way. She placed the rabbit beside her and observed it carefully. The girl brought the plush bunny closer to her. At that moment, she was immensely happy. Finally, she had her own bunny. This toy was neither stolen nor found. No one will be able to take it away from her. She remembered that the whole company had bunnies now. Those toys united the princes. The girl felt that she would no longer envy Juliana's doll in the future. Another piece of good news was that the priests installed another bed in the captain's room. This will help the boys rest better. Romeo will move less while sleeping. Romeo thought it was an exaggeration, since he only kicked someone a couple of times and fell off the bed. In the end, Romeo suggested they stop talking about him and go to sleep. A strong wind blew outside. It seemed that a heavy rain would start soon. Griffith went to turn off the light. Oscar seemed pensive. Very soon, all the crown princes went asleep. At one point, the restless Romeo again ended up on the edge of the bed. A strong lightning strike contributed to the blonde finally falling off the bed. The fall was painful and fully woke up the crown prince. After a few seconds, the blonde heard soft sounds, like crying. Romeo realized that the sounds were coming from Oscar, who was completely covered by the blanket. Trying not to wake anyone, Romeo walked in the darkness towards the captain's bed. The boy carefully began to call Ray, trying not to wake the others or scare the leader. He managed to wake Relia quickly, although Romeo did scare her. Romeo said they have problems with Oscar again. He clarified that, apparently, Oscar had another attack. Romeo said the boy cannot breathe well and that he was going to call the priests. Relia thought it was unnecessary to call the priests and ran to the children's room. Meanwhile, Griffith and Calyx also woke up and were by Oscar's bed with a lamp. The girl felt bad seeing Oscar's state. She got out of bed and covered her ears. The boy was trembling a lot. The protagonist ran towards the boy and started calling him by name so he would react quickly. Relia touched his face and started telling him that she was already there. Oscar reacted to the girl's voice, but his gaze remained empty. She started to calm him down, constantly repeating that everything was fine. This helped, and the boy completely focused on his friend. The heroine congratulated Oscar, telling him he was doing very well. The girl waited for the boy to overcome his fear and calm down. It turned out that the attack was caused by the rain. Oscar tried to explain it. He was searching for the words. It was noticeable how difficult it was for the boy to tell. Oscar said his mom died on a rainy day. Relia tried to calm the boy, repeating that rain is just rain. The girl tucked the prince into bed and soothed him, assuring him that nothing bad would happen now. Relia didn't expect an immediate effect, but she expected a better outcome. She looked at the toy lying near the pillow. The heroine placed the rabbit next to Oscar. Relia asked him that every time Oscar feels fear or anxiety, he must remember something. He will have to pick up the toy and talk to it, as if Ray were in front of him. The boy hugged the toy tightly and calmed down. Relia was happy to have managed to calm Oscar's attack. After this, the heroine remembered that they were not alone in the room. The other crown princes watched her attentively. Calyx asked Ray if Oscar was possessed by a demon. Oscar pretended not to understand what they were talking about, and Relia felt a sudden urge to hit Calyx. She approached him and pinched his cheek for having such absurd thoughts. Griffith asked the leader why Oscar was acting so weird if he wasn't possessed. The girl understood that she had to tell those two princes everything in detail. Anyway, she was calm, since it wouldn't be the first time she had to explain the same thing. She agreed to tell Calyx and Griffith what was really happening to Oscar. Relia mentioned that she had already explained Oscar's situation to Romeo in detail once. While Ray explained why Oscar wasn't possessed, the boy hugged a rabbit. Relia explained in detail what was happening to Oscar, and that it was the aftermath of a trauma. Immediately afterwards, the girl added that everyone fears something, even if it's just one thing. Griffith asked what their leader feared the most. The girl thought he feared hunger the most, but that answer would be very strange. So she replied that what he feared most was hunger in the Empire. Calyx said it was nonsense, but Griffith clearly liked the captain's answer. Oscar fears his father the most, and Romeo fears demons. Griffith declared that he fears nothing in the world. Relia thought that Griffith would simply never admit his fears. Calyx maintained a suspicious silence, so Ray asked him why he was quiet. The prince proudly declared that there is nothing in the world he fears, since he wasn't even scared of the wolves. Unexpectedly, Oscar declared as if he knew what Calyx fears. Holding a rabbit in his hands, the boy said that Calyx is afraid of girls. Oscar saw that the last time a girl tried to talk to Calyx, he panicked and fled. At this statement, Calyx instantly blushed and began to say that this never happened. He demanded that Oscar retract his statement. The boys barely restrained the crown prince. When Calyx's anger reached its limit, the captain interrupted them all. Ray was laughing out loud. The whole altercation was hilarious from his perspective. The loud laughter instantly cooled Calyx down. Romeo and Griffith sighed with relief. Calyx thought the captain shouldn't laugh so loudly, but he couldn't stop. It made him laugh a lot. Romeo was satisfied with the outcome of the conversations about fears, although the friends never found out what Griffith's real fears were. And Calyx, Romeo proposed that now they should talk about what each one liked. Relia loved the idea. Talking about favorite things was better than about fears. The boys thought about it, and it turned out that answering that question was also not easy. Each of them tried to highlight the happiest activity of their life. In the end, the princes talked all night finding out what they liked and what they didn't. They laughed and didn't notice the storm raging outside. This day marked a significant strengthening of the friendship between the 5 princes. The boys began to celebrate the birthdays and festivities of each empire together. The seasons passed in this hustle and bustle, and now the princes could call themselves true friends. 2 years have already passed since that conversation. Rio's reflections were interrupted by a girl who asked him to accept a letter. Relia received the letter with dignity, as befits a prince. She looked at the girl, thanked her, and promised to keep the letter. From excitement, the girl blushed completely, just like her friends, who were a little behind. The girls watched the prince walk away, thinking he was a very kind boy. Rio returned to his room and looked at the table, where there were already about 20 letters. Now, one more letter joined the others, from another enamored fan. The boys saw that their captain had received another letter. Calyx wondered how the leader didn't get tired of so much attention. The boys had just finished fencing classes, and Calyx was very hungry. The boy exerted himself so much in class that he ate almost as much as Ray. Griffith said that Romeo and Oscar were late for the shower, but they would arrive soon. A few minutes later, the remaining crown princes also arrived at their common room. Romeo was surprised that the captain had returned so quickly from the library. Relia replied that she had managed to do everything quickly. Unexpectedly, Oscar decided to hand a letter to Ray. Relia was in shock because the boy seemed to be confessing his love, but it turned out a priest had asked him to deliver the letter. The girl immediately knew whose letter it was, and her spirits vanished instantly. She opened the envelope silently and concentrated on the content of the message. The first question was whether Relia hadn't gotten too tall. It was a very sensitive topic, as everyone had grown in 3 years. Even Oscar surpassed the girl in height. She thought being the shortest was a hard blow to her reputation as captain. The girl's mood was ruined, and she told everyone to change quickly and go to lunch. After training, everyone was hungry, so no one argued. The girl fully opened the letter and confirmed it was from Emperor Rydios of the Auraria Empire. She began to read the content of the pages attentively. With every new line, fear and despair overwhelmed her more and more. After a while, the entire company waited for the captain to finally go to lunch. Ray looked at the boys with an annoyed and irritated look and didn't reply anything. After this, the girl turned around and returned towards the quarters. The boys didn't understand why the captain was behaving like this. Calyx decided to approach the leader. He caught up with Ray and, placing his hand on his shoulder, asked him where he had decided to go. The girl turned abruptly and removed her friend's hand from her shoulder. After this, Ray asked them to stop bothering him. This time, the entire company was worried, but Oscar was the most restless. He asked if they could help Relia in any way. Ray only asked Oscar to shut up and not talk to him anymore. Romeo tried to explain that everyone was very worried about the captain. Griffith added that Ray had never behaved like this under any circumstances. The girl herself understood it, but it was very difficult for her to deal with the emotions overwhelming her. She began to tremble from the attention, but only replied that the boys knew nothing about her. After that, she abruptly moved away, trying to be alone as quickly as possible. Everyone was stunned by this sudden change in the captain. No one said another word. Upon reaching his room, Relia quickly closed the door and leaned against it. A second later, she finally controlled her breathing and moved away from the door. She walked to the sofa and knelt beside it, trying to calm down. The young woman was aware that the situation couldn't be worse. Relia didn't know what to do or how to behave now. In essence, the Emperor's letter contained nothing unknown or special to her, but a single sentence threw the girl off balance. In it, she was told not to forget her duty and to behave normally. This warning didn't make much sense, as the magic of silence prevents her from speaking about the real culprit. The young woman thought that, over the last 2 years, she had had many conversations with the princes, but she hadn't had a single opportunity to tell them the truth about herself. The protagonist knew that 1 year after separating, the princes would receive a letter announcing Rio's death. Originally, Relia even wished for that moment to come as soon as possible, so she wouldn't see those noisy ones again. But time passed, and the relationship between her and the princes grew closer and closer. The time they spent together became the happiest of her life. The girl didn't want that time to end and began to forget that she was just an imposter. The protagonist started thinking about the boys' feelings when they received the news of her death. She imagined more or less how each of them would experience the death of their captain. Rio's passing would affect each of them and leave an indelible scar on their hearts. The girl wanted to mitigate their pain, but she had no way to do it. That's why Relia got the idea to ruin the relationship with the princes before they left the temple. The girl remained absorbed and didn't notice that the princes had already entered her room. In a firm voice, she reproached them for having asked them not to burst into her room anymore. Romeo blurted out that it was naive to expect them to simply pretend everything was fine. The girl shouted at Romeo to shut up and please leave her alone once and for all. Then, the insecure Oscar intervened, commenting that the captain was behaving very strangely. Romeo begged Ray to tell them what was wrong, that they would try to help him with anything. Calyx also wanted to know what was happening to his leader, and why Ray didn't want to explain anything to them. Griffith opined that Ray was intentionally ruining their relationship. Very abruptly, Oscar added, with some doubt, that it was Ray who taught them to share their problems. It was hard to refute those words, so Rio simply tried to act as if he didn't hear them. Oscar approached the leader and carefully took his hands, just as the captain calmed little Oscar. The prince reminded her once more that Relia can always rely on her friends. After those words, Relia could no longer contain the storm of emotions inside her. Oscar saw the heroine's face and was disconcerted, not knowing how to react to that. But the crown prince still didn't let go of the girl's hands so that she could at least feel his support. The girl found the strength to look at Oscar, her face now completely bathed in tears. Relia decided that she really had to explain something to her friends, somehow. She gathered her courage and started to speak, but her voice trembled treacherously. She couldn't utter a single sentence. Tears flowed with renewed intensity. And yet, she uttered the sentence that the boys shouldn't be sad if she died one day. None of the crown princes expected that answer. Romeo decided to ask again what the captain meant to tell them. He thought the captain was sad because they would separate soon, or that he simply had a nightmare. Calix remembered that in any case they would see each other soon, even if they separated in the near future. The bearers of the mark, according to the book's history, must unite to confront the dragon. Calix promised that he would do everything possible to protect the captain on that expedition. Reo quietly replied that he probably wouldn't be able to join their group to destroy the dragon. The boy did not specify that he was supposed to die before that happened. The girl decided that she had to finish what she had started to tell. Relia shared that someone is hunting her father's throne, and therefore, the crown prince is in danger. The girl concluded that with her weak body and the threats to her life in the empire, the princes had to assume that Ria would not be a dragon hunter. Then she added that the boys must be extremely careful and return together, alive and unharmed. Suddenly, Relia heard a clear and resounding no, which surprised her. It was Oscar. He was also standing and crying, but his voice was full of conviction when the prince said he didn't want the captain to die. Oscar added that he hated this. Relia had never seen Oscar like this, but seconds later, Oscar's determination faded, and already in tears, he begged the captain not to die. The other princes began to calm Oscar down. They absolutely did not want to be in the company of two crying princes now. But after those words, Relia finally calmed down. She observed a matured Oscar, remembering what would happen to him in the future. Someday he will obtain a demonic sword and become immortal. The girl observed Calix, who already showed heaps of bravery, even without need. He will enter history as the mercenary king, wielding a sword impossible for others. Griffith awakened his powers much earlier than planned in the plot. The prince will gain the status of wielder of the holy sword and will have powers superior to the Kret saints. The always disobedient and dissatisfied Oscar will also enter history. He will obtain the status of word mage, mastering the dragon's heart and being the youngest to build a magic tower. Compared to them, in the company was she, Relia, full of lies, and possessing nothing. She felt great pride in having managed to befriend these true heroes of the future. But along with the pride, the girl also felt an intense pain. The heroine felt very pained that it was she who was destined to gain such loyal friends, only to lose them later. The girl added that one day, each of them would be part of a great story. Therefore, the day she is gone, they must not be sad about it. The next day, Romeo and the boys went to look for the captain in the morning. Ray took a long time to open, so the boys asked if their leader was crying again. Relia was starting to get even angrier with those comments. It annoyed her that now the boys constantly bothered her by saying she could start crying at any moment. The girl didn't understand how she could show herself to them after yesterday's scene. She was very embarrassed, but still decided she had done the right thing by telling them about Ray's possible death. But because of those tears, Calix started calling her crying baby Rio. Relia wanted to hit the boy. After lying down a while longer, she came to the conclusion that suffering would not help at all. The girl calculated that she had about 6 months left to live in the temple. Therefore, she would dedicate all the remaining time to creating as many happy memories as possible. Romeo remembered that today was Griffith's birthday, so the captain couldn't spend the day alone. Relia left the doll on the bed and told the princes she was sleeping. That's why she didn't hear them. Many congratulations from his friends, and a large cake awaited Griffith that night. Each of the princes had prepared a gift in the form of a letter. Giving letters on birthdays had already become a tradition for the temple students. Calix regretted not being able to go out to the city now and buy birthday gifts. Oscar and Relia still didn't understand how they managed to do that last time, and all thanks to Romeo. Romeo thought that the captain had organized all of that last time, so they shouldn't blame him. And in fact, today is the last day Ray can treat Romeo lightly, because Romeo has done something Ray will be grateful for a A long time. The protagonist didn't understand what Romeo was proud of, but Oscar remembered that tomorrow is someone's birthday, of someone very dear to their captain. Calix also remembered that last year, they celebrated another birthday. They celebrated that party, but they never knew who the birthday person was. Romeo supposed the captain was talking about his girlfriend's birthday. Ray shouted at Romeo that he had never heard stupider thoughts from him. The protagonist tried to say it was simply a very important person in her life. The insecure Oscar immediately misinterpreted everything and thought that someone was more important than them. His friends. The girl immediately cut off the boy's wrong thoughts, telling him it wasn't like that. She didn't know how to tell them the truth, but she understood that they wanted to know the answer. Relia said it was a person very close to her, and that they had known each other since childhood. She would love to tell Oscar the whole truth, but that would literally kill the girl because of the magical oath. The girl looked at Oscar and told him not to be sad about it. After that, Relia added that Oscar was also a very valuable friend to her. The friends finally started the party. The cake was cut, and the celebration officially kicked off. Romeo handed out pieces of cake to everyone. For some reason, he had taken on this task. Relia focused on enjoying both the party and the cake to the fullest. At some point, she thought that all this fun would disappear as soon as she returned to her homeland. The girl didn't want to return to the Empire, but time was running relentlessly. Alone, the heroine decided that how she spent the remaining time in the temple was important. But it was also crucial to think about the future, to avoid an early death. She must stay as far away from the pond and close to the castle exit as possible to escape. Unfortunately, real problems like the return of the ex-emperor are beyond Relia's control. The girl was also worried about her friend's participation in the battle against the dragon. It is in this battle that Calix will suffer very serious injuries. With his sword, he will be able to pierce the dragon's scale, but he will be in the center of the monster's attack. Finally, at some point, Calix will be able to strike the dragon. The dragon will resist desperately and launch deadly attacks against the hero, one after another. But Calix will fight until the end and deal a mortal wound to the dragon, which will finally help restore peace. Calix will have to pay for this peace with his life. His skin and bones melted. If it weren't for Griffith's divine power, Calix would not have returned alive. Griffith was able to heal most of his friend's wounds, but not all of them. He couldn't return his eyes. The inhabitants of the Asgard Empire had lived for many years under the Emperor's tyranny, and they dreamed of a new ruler. They expected that, after the victory over the dragon, Calix would occupy the throne. But when they saw him, they began to fear the prince of their empire. Calix's eyes had become completely different. The golden color of the eyes had always been a symbol of Asgardian power, and it was believed that such eyes saw everything hidden. It was precisely those golden eyes that the heroine remembered when she was in the temple. After losing his sight, Calix's eyes acquired a new mysterious gleam, and people began to avoid him. They considered Calix a cursed dragon. The boy sought no reward, nor did he take their rejection to heart, but he began to hide his eyes. The protagonist did not find Calix's eyes terrifying and was willing to comfort him. Juliana thought that his eyes had saved the world and that she did not consider him cursed. Those words melted the hero's heart, and he became another small fish in Juliana's pond. But in the end, there was no love between them, and the hero returned to wandering the world. And so he lost everything, from his hand and his sight to love and his country. Reading the book, the girl didn't understand how they could treat the hero like that. And now she, as Relia, would forever remember when he often smiled like a fool. A terrible, unimaginable future awaited that boy, and the heroine wanted to avoid it at all costs. But in the original story, there was no way to change the young man's fate, since only he could pierce the dragon's scale and deliver the mortal blow to the monster. She comforted her companions, saying that even if she had known in advance, nothing could have changed. The girl had already tried to find a solution many times, but still couldn't see it. Adding to the despair was the thought that Relia couldn't even fully control her own body now. It was terrible that the character had no magical powers. This way she could at least help, if not Calix, then herself. But the girl didn't feel a shred of mana inside her. Those who possess it can accumulate it in their body and train. People who imbued weapons with mana were called aura masters. Those who used mana for their techniques were called mages. The girl was enraged by having entered the novel, but not having received even a couple of spells as a gift. She also regretted not knowing anything about alchemy. Although in this world alchemy was heresy and strictly forbidden. It is rumored that the Philosopher's Stone grants any wish. Legendary elixirs cure wounds, diseases, and even death. Neither the stone nor the elixir has ever been created in this world. But healing potions were sold on the black market. Relia saw an opportunity. With luck, she could heal Calix's eyes, but it was just an illusion. She has no powers, and realistically, she will starve to death in the tower. She wondered if she should flee, taking advantage of the rebellion in the castle, or beg Juliana, the heroine of the novel, who saved her. If Relia tells the girl she is hungry, she certainly won't refuse. Juliana will surely bring her a basket full of food and help her escape. But if the heroine runs into the emperor or one of his brothers, that almost means death. The girl had to make a difficult decision, on which a lot depended. A few seconds later, a brilliant idea occurred to Relia. She remembered that not far from the tower, in the forest, there was a cabin, Elizabeth's secret refuge. Her mother carried out various magical investigations there. Probably, there will be many useful things and emergency rations in the cabin, with magic to preserve them. According to the book, Perseus will give this cabin to Juliana when he sees her magical abilities. And remember his deceased wife. The young woman decided that she could get some food there if she managed to reach the cabin before Juliana. All that remains is to sneak into that refuge and take the food without anyone noticing. And of course, along with the food, she will have to take her mother's magical artifacts. The artifacts will help the girl escape the palace, because if she stays, she will have no future. The girl must try, even if it is dangerous and she becomes a thief. With these thoughts, the heroine went to sleep and hugged her plush bunny. She decided that it would be fine, even if she didn't have anyone on her side. She hugged the bunny and promised herself that she would find her own way to survive. The next day, Romeo gave each of the princes an unusual feather. He explained that they were magic feathers, with which they could communicate with each other. Then, Romeo demonstrated how his feather worked using his own example. At that precise moment, a scroll appeared before each prince. Such magic was new to everyone, even to Griffith and Calix. They unfurled the scrolls and saw the text written by Romeo. The blonde explained that, when writing one, the letters would appear to everyone at once. Romeo added that the magic would work as long as there was a magic crystal in the feather. It turned out that Romeo meant this yesterday, when he implied they would praise him for his ingenuity. Relia was very happy, as she could correspond with her friends until Rio's death. The blonde finished presenting his surprise and suggested going to eat cake. Calix was not enthusiastic about the idea of eating cake 2 days in a row. They lit the candles, and everyone congratulated the unknown person, a close friend of the captain. For his birthday, the boys expected the leader to blow out the candles, but Ray didn't seem to be in a hurry. After a while, the captain carefully blew out the candles. No one noticed, but at that moment Ray's face showed more sadness than joy. But it was done, and it was time to distribute the cake among everyone. The boys cheered wildly and enthusiastically congratulated the captain. When Calix saw the leader's face, he feared he had done something wrong. And all because his leader, apparently, was about to burst into tears again. Lately, Calix no longer understood Rio's mood and emotions. Oscar thought something had happened to Relia again. The girl wiped away her tears and replied that she was fine and they shouldn't worry. Romeo looked for a handkerchief, thinking to himself that it was time for the captain to buy his own. They were tears of joy, because the princes were celebrating the birthday of someone unknown. Today was not Ray's birthday, but Relia's, a minor character from the novel. Wiping away her tears, the girl thanked everyone for the congratulations. The boys still didn't understand why their leader had started crying again. Romeo was sad, but didn't know how to help his captain with his emotions. Relia thought she would spend the next birthday alone again. The voice of one of the princes brought the heroine out of her thoughts. They wanted to know in more detail whose birthday they were celebrating this year. Romeo supposed it was someone Relia could never see again. The blonde suggested that perhaps they were celebrating Ray's mother's birthday. After those words, Calix understood that this explained the captain's tears. Griffith and Oscar were silent, but a shadow of sadness covered their faces. Seeing the dejected boys, the young woman declared that it was not her mother's birthday. A second later, she remembered that every prince had lost his mother. Oscar's father murdered his own mother a few years ago. Calix lost both parents almost immediately after birth. Griffith never knew his biological mother, and his stepmother hated him. Romeo's mother committed suicide right before his very eyes. Thinking about it, Raylia's mother also had a sad fate. The young woman decided that no negative feeling would ruin this day. So she settled on the sofa and armed herself with a fork. She began to actively use it on the cake, which was not yet fully cut. A second later, she pulled out a large piece and began devouring it urgently. The boys started complaining, and Oscar became worried about the captain's state again. With his mouth full, Ray replied that if they didn't start eating cake urgently, she would eat it all herself. The boys knew the captain was capable of that, so they immediately pounced on the cake. That evening, there was an unusually beautiful sunset with a total absence of wind. Calix sarcastically noted that the captain seemed about to burst into tears again. Romeo, with a look of resignation, looked for a handkerchief, but it turned out that Oscar also started carrying a handkerchief for the captain. Relia strongly hit Calix and Romeo on the head to stop them from mocking her constant tears. Afterwards, Calix asked if the captain had really changed his mind about crying. The boy noticed that the leader had been crying lately whenever he had the slightest opportunity. Relia, with a stern face, replied that right now she was not going to cry, nor did she intend to. And, in fact, Relia decided that she would never shed another tear. After this, she added that they didn't have too much time together left. The clock was ticking, and since that was the case, wasting time on whining would be an absolute waste. The girl wanted to take the opportunity to do a lot of incredible things in the company of the princes. She wanted to laugh out loud and have a great time until her body held up. Ray begged that, in the future, the boys remember her radiant smile, not her tear-soaked face. She also wanted the boys to smile as much as possible to capture them happily in her memory, because all this time at the camp was the happiest time in the heroine's life. And the day came when everyone had to return to their respective empires. A servant entered the prince's room and informed him that his carriage had arrived. Relia had to gather her courage after those words. The most hated moment of her life was beginning. She put on a calm face and replied that she would be ready soon. Upon leaving, the girl saw that the carriages for each of the princes were already waiting. She wanted to leave cheerfully, but the tears treacherously returned. Calix pointed out that they would see each other again in a few years and asked her to stop crying. A sobbing Oscar asked them to write letters constantly. Griffith, with a sad face, whispered that he would miss his captain. Romeo demanded that they stop crying now, because he was annoyed by that atmosphere. His words didn't have much effect on the sobbing Ray and Oscar. Romeo was left with no choice but to resign himself and wait in silence for the couple to calm down. But he couldn't stand still, so unexpectedly he approached and hugged Griffith. Then he did the same with a surprised Calix. Then it was the turn to hug the heartbroken Oscar. He wished each of them health and told them to write if anything happened. Given Romeo's unexpected behavior, Relia even stopped crying. She remembered the moment she saw all the princes for the first time. At that time, Romeo said he hated each of his current friends. Now those words sounded so ridiculous that the girl couldn't help but laugh out loud. The princes didn't understand the sudden change in Ray's mood, from crying to laughing. They asked if Ray was okay, and Relia reacted immediately by hitting Calix. Calix didn't understand why the captain suddenly hit him. The captain didn't understand either. The girl looked at Calix and told him he was an insensitive blockhead. After those words, Calix felt like hitting his leader. Ray instantly said that sometimes he got angry with Calix, but he never hated him. Relia pointed out that, thanks to his sincerity, he was the one she found it easiest to communicate with. Afterwards, the protagonist added that he should be careful at home, especially with his uncle. The girl confessed to Griffith that at first she thought he was keeping his distance from them. She was happy that he always supported them all. It was only thanks to him that they managed to unite like this. She asked him to be careful of those who wanted to take advantage of his power when he returned home. Griffith reassured Ray, telling him that he didn't have to worry about that. After that, the girl went to say goodbye to Oscar. She told the boy that during those 3 years, the prince had worked hard on himself. Ray noted down that he is a wonderful person who did not give up and overcame his fears. Shortly after, the heroine added that regardless of the distance, they would have each other as long as they had the dolls. Oscar, starting to cry again, promised that he would take care of himself and not get sick. That is the best answer she wanted to hear from a close friend. The last one was Romeo, but the girl didn't know what or how to tell him. In the end, she pointed at him with her finger and told him he should be nicer. Romeo was in shock at such a farewell speech from his best friend. Then, the boy gently hit the captain on the head with his fist. Relia added that she had told the pure truth, and she cautiously looked at the blonde. Romeo was sad, and tears began to well up in his eyes. He hugged the leader and promised to strive to fulfill what she wanted. The girl hugged Romeo in return and thanked him for saving her that day, pulling her out of the pond. The heroine did not say it out loud, but she thought Romeo was a very kind person and brave. After this, the priestesses began to carry the boys' things to the carriages. And so came the moment when each of them went their own way. Relia watched each of the princes and only then got into the carriage. Sadness overwhelmed her at that moment, as no one but her knew her future. And what's worse, those were the last minutes she would see them in her entire life. It hurt her deeply to think that she would never be able to reunite with them, like Crown Prince Rio. Even so, those 3 years would be forever etched as the best period of both their lives. Thanks to that quartet, Relia would never feel alone in her soul again. Each of them had become someone special, and no one would change that. Now everyone was a handsome young man, worthy of the title of hero. She would remember them like this, young and full of energy, looking to the future with hope. Turning around, the young woman thanked them for the 3 years in the temple. The carriages began to slowly leave the temple. Each of the princes, at that moment, thought about his future. Calix was pleased that Rio supported his wish. Despite the complaints of the others, he expressed his desire not to be heir to the throne, but a mercenary, because his uncle would not leave him in peace. Griffith thought his friend's idea was complete madness. Romeo also didn't understand why the boy wanted to stop being royalty. Upon hearing the confession, Rio immediately approached Calix. He pointed out that it was a brilliant idea and that he trusted his friend would achieve it. Relia then announced that Calix would become one of the greatest mercenaries of his time. Suddenly, Calix remembered a dream he had the night before leaving. In this dream, there were wolves, and he relived events from his first year in the temple. In the dream, he lost an arm, but the strangest thing was not finding Ray anywhere. Calix felt that the dream showed how things would have gone without the captain. This dream disturbed the young man. He desperately tried to decipher its meaning. Shortly after, sad thoughts invaded him about the reception from his uncles and cousins. Most likely, his family would try to throw him out of the house without hesitation. The boy looked at the mark and realized he no longer feared that future. The reason not to be afraid is that Leo believes in him and fully trusts him. He repeated the captain's phrase about the best mercenary, and his spirits instantly improved. Meanwhile, in some part of the palace, someone called one of the maids. The emperor decided he must keep the girl, as she could still be useful to him. He ordered soldiers to post troops nearby to watch the young woman's every move. Relia contemplated the tower, where almost her entire existence unfolded. She understood that she would spend every moment there until the rebellion, and even after. This time, unlike the heroine of the book, Relia didn't just plan to endure. She planned to get out of the castle alive. Relia decided to write a letter to the boys, even though it was still very early. She wrote about the weather, that she had already had breakfast, and that she felt much better at home. The girl mentioned that homemade food was richer and more varied, and the most wonderful thing. She wouldn't have to put up with their tedious chatter anymore. The heroine gathered her hair. It was terribly cold in the tower without heating. The clothes she had didn't protect her from the cold and drafts at all. Relia looked at her suitcase and was glad that at least they hadn't taken that away. So now she had some food saved from the temple and winter clothes from there. And one of her greatest treasures, a plush bunny, also stayed with the girl. She hugged it every day and remembered her friends. Furthermore, the toy had become the girl's only interlocutor in that place. There was a fireplace in the tower, so the protagonist started walking around it and collecting branches. The skills for lighting a fire in the stove that she learned in the temple came in very handy for the girl. Although, in the temple there were many matches and candles, so they didn't need to light a new fire. With each passing day, the girl missed civilization and people more. The girl watching the spark light up finally saw the branches burn. Suddenly, dense gray smoke came out of the chimney. Something very unpleasant. It seems the girl accidentally collected dry and also wet branches. Now her eyes were burning from the smoke, but it was better than freezing to death. The girl decided she must gather as much firewood as possible before it snowed. It was much colder inside the tower than the girl thought, so she had to prepare thoroughly for the heavy frosts. At least, it was good that the tower had access to water. The girl deduced that magic was used to heat the water, but she didn't know how that would help her. Originally, Relia wanted to visit Elizabeth's secret cabin right after returning, but she couldn't do it, as the emperor assigned her security guards. To avoid risks or provoking the emperor's wrath, the girl decided to wait for the right moment. By spring, they wouldn't be watching her anymore, and the real Rio would be poisoned by radio's allies. Very soon after that, the rebels with the former emperor will invade the imperial palace. At that moment, a real chaos and bloodshed will begin in and around the palace. Until the emperor changes, it's better not to stick her head out of the tower. Emperor Perseus is much less interested in the girl than his brother, so she will have more freedom of action. The bad thing was that, after Rio's death, the protagonist would no longer be able to write letters to her friends. The girl saw that her message still had no reply, so everyone was still sleeping. She waited a few more minutes and decided to continue with her daily chores. Considering how quickly the snow arrived, it was necessary to start actively gathering firewood right away. The girl left the tower and went along her usual route in search of firewood. With each passing day, the street became colder and colder. At that moment, the heroine felt lonely again. Absorbed in her thoughts, the girl stopped watching the path and immediately stumbled. Although the fall was short, falling onto the cold, hard ground always hurts. The girl realized that she had scraped the skin on her hand. The wound began to burn. The girl decided that she needed to develop a clear plan for the future. With the emperor's change, it was crucial to quickly find the cabin with food and magical artifacts. The girl hoped that Elizabeth wouldn't be angry if her daughter took her provisions from there. It was equally important to avoid contact with Juliana and her brothers as much as possible. The girl didn't want to be the heroine of the book, nor ask for forgiveness over and over again. And after that preparation, the heroine only has to escape the tower at the right moment. In the novel, Relia dies by falling into a pond. But if not, she would be married to a stranger. The girl was not going to consent to a political marriage, so she had to flee before that happened. It snowed again, and it seems like this time it won't melt. The girl understood that she had to hurry with the preparations for winter. Every day Relia went out and collected branches. Afterwards, she lit the fireplace and dried the clothes wet from the snow. Despite the fireplace, the tower remained cold. The girl was glad to have collected a lot of firewood, seeing the heavy snowfall through the window. She heard some noises and looked towards the table. The magic letter was glowing, which meant someone had finally writ. The heroine hurried to read the reply. She felt like she had waited an eternity. The letter said that Ray was a true champion. It was a reply from Oscar. He was happy that the captain was okay. The young man wrote that he was also fine, and that nightmares no longer tormented him. Oscar believed that the toy Ray gave him had freed him from nightmares. The next sentence surprised the heroine as much as those who read her correspondence. Oscar wrote that he feared someone would find out about the toy. If that happened, the boy would be very embarrassed. That's why he hid the toy under the pillow. Calyx didn't interrupt, but enjoyed reading his friend's chat. Griffith felt the need to mention that they should thank him for having money that day. Romeo burst into the conversation, saying that apparently everyone was fine except him, who was frustrated by everything. Romeo complained about how bored he was alone in the castle, and that the temple was more interesting. At the end of the chat, Romeo asked what the other princes thought about taming the cruel dragon. Relia read the conversation and felt that the boys were still exactly the same as before. At this thought, tears sprang to the protagonist's eyes again. She squeezed the letter tighter and did her best to calm down. The young woman decided that she would definitely write a new letter tomorrow. After this, completely covered by the blanket, she lay down to sleep. None of the princes imagined that their captain would spend another night in tears. Time passed, the snow was abundant, and the firewood reserves were running out. The boys kept writing to each other. They already had a huge pile of sheets. The food provisions were also running out, which worried the protagonist a lot. One day, spring finally prevailed, and the snow began to melt little by little. It was excellent news. There was a time when the wind and snow prevented her from going out. That day, she thought again about what the hell she was going to be now. She had many ideas. She even thought that the best thing would be to hibernate. While looking for firewood on the street, the girl realized something important. She looked around and made sure no one was watching her. The girl concluded that she must take full advantage of this situation. Meanwhile, somewhere in the palace, someone called one of the maids. It was another maid, and apparently she needed help urgently. A passing girl accidentally bumped into a man in front of the other maid. Realizing she was interrupting the conversation, the girl apologized and left immediately. At that moment, the man patted the maid's shoulder and told her he was counting on her. Afterward, the maids left together to carry out their assigned duties. The young woman concluded that this man was the other maid's secret love. But that maid didn't want to talk about the man, and now she had an important mission at hand. Several months have passed since the heroine returned to the tower. The snow has almost disappeared. She won't have to look for branches to light the fireplace anymore, and it will be easier to look for fences left from last year. Relia started walking further than usual, but still couldn't find Elizabeth's cabin. When the storm started, the pursuit of the young woman stopped, and they forgot about her. Her servants were murdered years ago. In the end, this was the first winter Relia spent in complete solitude, and the spring that arrived gave no reason to rejoice, since this meant the imminent death of Rio and the end of her correspondence with the boys. Their letters were the protagonist's only joy. The girl constantly awaited replies from her friends and now realized it was like a social media addiction. These boys, even thousands of kilometers away, gave her strength. The girl thought about how much time was left until the death of Crown Prince Rio. Suddenly, the girl heard agitated voices not far from her. The knights debated that something terrible had been done by the one their majesty trusted. Relia overheard that the emperor had imprisoned her and that the prince's food had been poisoned. That day arrived unexpectedly soon. Relia froze, as if struck by lightning. Reacting, she crouched down and began to think quickly. She thought about the words she heard about the prince and the poison, hoping it wasn't what she thought. But everything fit, and that meant that Crown Prince Rio was already dead. The girl ran as fast as she could towards the tower. She wanted to hide all the letters as quickly and securely as possible. Looking at the sheets, the protagonist wondered if there was any way to communicate the truth to them. She stood motionless over the table, deciding to write to her friends. She understood that she was the one corresponding with them and wanted the princes to know it. But the spell prevented it. Not even through a letter could the heroine reveal the truth about her identity. If the heroine wrote that Relia is Rio, the girl would break the rule of the spell, so any insinuation would lead to instant death, so she had to remain silent. Finding no solution, the heroine looked out the window and saw someone who shouldn't appear so soon. But it was him, without a doubt, and he was approaching at high speed. He was at the head of his army, giving orders upon arrival at the castle. The soldiers followed their commander, with the goal of overthrowing the current emperor. It was Rydio's Perseus, the deposed one, and he came to claim his throne. The girl heard the army asking the locals not to be alarmed, as they were coming to return the throne to the true Emperor Perseus. This meant that the soldiers would reach the girl's tower very soon. Due to the magical restrictions imposed by the emperor, she could not tell them the truth. The girl decided that at least she could leave a clue. She hoped that Romeo or Griffith would understand what she was trying to communicate to them. On a blank sheet, the girl wrote her name, Relia Auraria. After that, she realized that the time had come to say goodbye. She took out the magic stone so that the letters would no longer appear. The girl put all the letters and the magic feather in a box. She hid them under the wooden floor near the closet. After that, the girl got into the closet and waited for the invasion to end. She tried to calm down and look like an adult, but her body was that of a 10-year-old girl. Relia feared what was happening outside and regretted not having any abilities. The protagonist remained in the closet, terrified, until the noises of the battle ceased. 2 days later, the conflict came to an end. Suddenly, an emperor's soldier opened the closet door. At that moment, the palace servants were already spreading the news at full speed. The usurper Rydio's Auraria had been defeated by Emperor Perseus. The young man asked her name and if she was Princess Iris's daughter and told her the emperor required her. Iris Auraria was the younger sister of Rydio's and Perseus, and the only princess of the empire. She maintained the status of the noblest lady until Perseus married Elizabeth. After losing her status, Iris hated Elizabeth and tormented her mercilessly. Her fury grew even more when the queen gave birth to twins for the emperor. But one day, Iris met a man whom she truly loved. He was a simple knight who died young, but Iris managed to get pregnant before his death. On the day of Iris's delivery, Elizabeth also went into premature labor. Meanwhile, Perseus was on an expedition and the emperor died, which benefited the younger brother. Upon realizing that the emperor's death and the absence of her husband were Rydious's doing, Elizabeth dismissed all the servants and gave birth alone. She had a girl whom she had to save at all costs. Elizabeth, immediately after giving birth, went to her brother-in-law's sister's room. She knew that Rydius would never allow Perseus's son to live. Elizabeth couldn't trust anyone, but she knew that Iris was also giving birth today, and she would become a mother. She hoped to give her baby to Iris, but upon entering, she realized that a tragedy had occurred. Iris was sitting on the bed, and her face reflected despair. The emperor's sister's newborn was dead. Iris thought Elizabeth had come to mock her. Elizabeth felt pity for the young woman who had lost her husband and son, but she couldn't leave. Putting aside her pride, Elizabeth knelt down and began to beg the young woman to help her. She showed the princess her baby and begged her to keep it. Elizabeth added that soon radios would kill her and that girl. That's why she implored the princess to take the girl away so she could survive. Those words only provoked a bitter grimace on Iris's face. She wasn't going to help the one who ruined her life. The princess was a sea of tears. She thought Elizabeth didn't understand what was happening. Iris started screaming that she didn't care about her or her baby. The maid tried to calm her mistress, but she was already screaming that it was better to kill the baby right there. The scream woke up the baby, and the girl looked at the screaming woman, emitting incomprehensible childish sounds. That instantly chilled Iris, and she burst into tears again. The young woman wavered between the desire to kill the baby and taking it in her arms. The baby woke up completely and began to scream at the top of its lungs. With a hoarse voice, Iris told Elizabeth to leave the baby there. Elizabeth silently and sincerely thanked the princess. The maid handed Elizabeth a dead child, Iris, and begged her to take care of it. Elizabeth promised to do everything possible for the child. After that, Elizabeth got up and slowly left Iris's room. She hugged him tightly, but the baby was ice cold. Elizabeth apologized to the child for separating him from his mother. At that moment in her chambers, the princess finally calmed down, hugging the baby. She felt its warmth. Before the young woman's eyes appeared the image of her deceased beloved. She noticed that the girl's eyes were identical to those of her chosen one. Iris instantly loved this child as if it were her own. The maid worried about her mistress and wanted to help her somehow. She asked Iris what else she could do, but saw that the girl wasn't reacting. After a few moments, it became clear that the princess had sunk into a deep sleep. From then on, events accelerated. Perseus died on the expedition, along with the twins. Elizabeth was poisoned, and Radios ascended to the throne. Iris's condition worsened every day. The loss of her own child had weakened her greatly. Shortly before her death, Iris fully trusted the maid, who knew the truth about the baby swap. The maid, following Iris's orders, took care of the child without revealing the truth to anyone. A few years later, one day, the maid suddenly disappeared. Along with the maid, Princess Iris's jewels disappeared, which is what Relia had heard. The reason was that the maid's parents had been kidnapped and declared heretics, and the princess's jewels were supposed to save them. In the end, no one else knew the truth about Relia, and now the servant had brought her before the emperor as his sister's daughter. The emperor was alone in his office, sitting at his desk, filling out paperwork. Seeing the girl, he asked if it was true that she was the daughter of his sister Iris. The emperor noticed Relia's eyes. They were the same as those of his late wife. Perseus was very surprised, but pretended not to notice the similarity. The emperor did not know that Relia was his daughter, and the plot required a wound in his heart. That wound was formed by the death of his wife and his stillborn son. Even the murder of his own brother, instead of relief, only added pain. In the story, all that suffering was to help the main protagonist. All of Perseus's tragedy was so that Juliana could heal him. The emperor and Relia silently looked at each other for several minutes. Relia thought that her existence in the story had only one purpose: to serve as a contrast, to show how much love the heroine received in Emperor Julian's family. The protagonist would become the one who would restore peace to the hearts of almost all the novel's characters. Meanwhile, Relia's character only caused more pain to Perseus. She wished to tell the truth, but she wouldn't change the plot of the book, and it would only kill her instantly. The emperor observed the young woman attentively once more. He felt deep distress, so he asked the servant to take her away immediately. The servant suddenly pulled her by the shoulder very roughly. The heroine looked at the boy and told him she could walk on her own. At that instant, she felt terror, as she had just understood something else. Now everyone in this castle is against her. Both the soldiers and the service staff believed she was unworthy of being there. No one told her directly, but the looks were enough. The young woman felt immense loneliness and weariness again. Alone, the emperor gave free rein to his emotions. One day, Perseus will know the truth about Relia, but it will be too late. The maid who knew the truth about her birth will return, but Relia will be dead. Even if she told the truth, it wouldn't help. They would take her for crazy. It was naive to think that the emperor would believe her just because she was blood of his blood. The protagonist knew this even when she was bedridden in the hospital. The girl hadn't recovered from the service staff's treatment when she ran into much more dangerous people. The twins were walking towards her, who also returned to the palace with the emperor. They approached the young woman and asked if she really was Relia Auraria. The boys knew that Iris Auraria constantly mocked their mother. From the first moment, they hated the protagonist for being the daughter of who she was. The girl looked with fear at the twins Cedric and Damien. Their hatred was palpable. The young woman decided not to answer, so as not to further provoke the hatred of her older blood brothers. Cedric declared that the girl was as shameless as her mother. The second brother added that, because of their mother's actions, their younger brother and their mother died. They didn't understand how, after what Iris did, her daughter still dared to be alive. They started shouting at the girl, calling her the daughter of murderers. The girl didn't answer, and that only enraged the princes more. Juliana interrupted them. She seemed surprised that her brothers were doing something without her. At that moment, the protagonist saw for the first time what the main heroine of the novel looked like. She was truly beautiful and attracted everyone's attention without the slightest effort. Even Relia thought that girl looked like a true angel. The brothers didn't want to have that argument in front of their younger sister. They turned to Juliana and told her they were waiting for her to go play together. They changed instantly, and not a trace remained of those threatening brothers. But still, they felt Relia's gaze upon them, and they didn't like that at all. One of the brothers, before leaving, called her scum. Then the children left, talking about their plans for the day. After this, Relia finally managed to reach the tower. She took the bunny in her hands and thought about how her friends would react when they saw her run in with the brothers. They would surely get angry and start defending the protagonist. And they would surely add something about how no one has the right to speak to their captain like that. Suddenly, the girl felt an urgent need to write to them, to hear their voices. As never before, she felt she didn't want to stay there for another second. The protagonist decided she urgently needed to pull herself together. To do this, she slapped herself with all her might. It hurt so much that tears sprang to her eyes. But at least that helped her pull herself together. She repeated to herself that no one else could help her. The protagonist did not intend to remain the helpless girl that Relia was in the story. The girl almost ran out of food, and dreaming of eating in the palace was out of the question. But there was one advantage to her current situation, and that was that they wouldn't watch her as closely anymore. This meant that the perfect time to look for Elizabeth's cabin had arrived. One day, luck smiled upon the protagonist, and she found the cabin. The door wasn't locked. Relia opened it very carefully. The house was impeccable. It gave the impression that the cabin was still being looked after. Everything in that place was in perfect condition. The girl thought that she was now where her mother had often been. If Elizabeth had survived, her life would be completely different now. According to the book, Elizabeth was a wonderful person with a kind heart. Without a doubt, she would have tried to protect her daughter from all enemies, even at the cost of her life. In any case, they needed to find food and magical items as soon as possible, and leave the cabin. It turned out that finding food was easy. They were under the floor, carefully placed in a large box. To prevent the food from spoiling, Elizabeth invented her own preservation magic. The jars looked empty, but the first one was written that it was bread. Apparently, the food returned when the jar was opened. According to the book's plot, Juliana was supposed to discover these provisions, but the protagonist didn't care about the canonical plot. She wanted to survive. The girl thought about the artifacts, but they were hidden much better. Relia knew that mana affinity is inherited, so she was betting on the power of the artifacts. The girl decided not to take risks and not to stay in the cabin for too long. She decided that she would return at another time to look for the artifacts without fail. On the way, she overheard a conversation and stopped immediately. The maid was trying to cheer up the tearful Juliana, suggesting a walk to buy a new dress. The protagonist remembered the book's plot well, and this conversation was happening too soon. Meanwhile, the maid suggested Juliana visit her brothers. Right after finishing their fencing practice, the maid thought the emperor was too cruel to the girl by not allowing her to touch him. Juliana immediately replied that Daddy was good and simply hadn't gotten used to her yet. Now the protagonist was completely sure she had understood the event that had just occurred correctly. In the book, there was an incident where the emperor rejected Juliana. The girl got scared and became extremely distressed at that moment. Afterwards, to compensate for his guilt, Perseus bought her a doll. Right after that incident, rumors about Relia's future began, so she had to flee the palace as soon as possible. Around the same time, The twins had been calling Carius for a couple of minutes. The man was so lost in thought that he forgot where he was. The boys were hurt that their uncle didn't see how well they had learned fencing. The uncle calmed the boys, saying they both had talent and that there was no one better in these lands. Right after, the man added that they couldn't relax and must keep training. Then, the boys will become swordsmen who will leave their mark on history. The brothers wanted the uncle to give them a fencing lesson tomorrow, but Carius was already busy. Carius planned to make a visit to the imperial palace. The maids were surprised to see a man from the family of Duke Superior. Carius was the younger brother of the late Princess Elizabeth. Sensing the curious gazes on him, the young man bowed. After that, he turned around and silently left the palace grounds. It is rumored that the princess's younger brother was so traumatized by her death that he couldn't speak for a long time. It took a long time for the young man to recover and be able to reach the imperial palace. He possibly returned to see the twin princes. Carius, however, thought that if Perseo had a new son, the prince's legacy would be in danger. With this situation, the Superior family could become his enemy. Without realizing it, the boy reached Elizabeth's secret cabin. He remembered how his sister spent a lot of time here, absorbed in her magical studies. The pain of losing his sister resurfaced. Carius missed her too much. Looking at the cabin, the young man noticed that the door wasn't properly closed. He decided to check who was there and why at that precise moment. The boy kicked the door open and saw the reason why it wasn't closed. He didn't expect to see anyone there, much less a little girl. The girl was sitting at the table. She seemed completely frozen. A sudden voice asking, "Who are you?" forced her to turn around. Fear was reflected in her eyes. She didn't know how to react. Surprise left the man perplexed for a few moments. The girl didn't expect anyone to show up at the cabin today. Terror made her tremble. She didn't know what to answer. The man noticed the girl's fear, although he didn't understand why. Carius thought she was a palace maid cleaning the cabin. The girl didn't answer. The prince believed she was hiding something, so Carius asked the girl what her name was. This question was as difficult to answer as the previous one. The boy expected an answer, but it never came. The girl seemed lost, but the fear in her eyes was still there. Only now did the boy notice the girl's gaze. Her eyes were exactly the same as those of his late sister. The boy tried to calm down, thinking that comparison was absurd. He noticed that the girl's silver hair revealed her belonging to the Auraria family. Carius asked the girl if she understood well that she was Princess Iris's daughter. The boy thought that the daughter of the one who mocked his sister had no right to be there. He compared her to a rat and demanded that she leave the cabin immediately. The man's shout provoked a new wave of terror in Relia. With her last strength, she stood up, trembling hard. The girl fled the cabin, afraid to look at her mother's brother. She ran with all her might, just to never see hatred in that man's eyes again. Left alone, Carius understood that he shouldn't have shouted at the girl, but he still did the right thing. Compared to his sister's constant suffering, a couple of harsh words are nothing. And yet, deep down, the boy regretted what he did, especially because of how the girl looked. Iris's daughter was very thin and emaciated. There was no trace of the dignity of the imperial lineage. Carius was surprised by this fact, because despite everything, the young woman was still the daughter of a princess. He wondered to what extent a person from a family that once ruled could fall. Now the prince was angry with himself for starting to worry about an unrelated girl. The important thing is that his nephews avoid the same fate. He will do whatever it takes for his brothers to be the direct heirs to the emperor. And what does the girl care about? The young woman ran to the tower and immediately closed the door behind her. She got under the blankets and tried to calm down. Even hugging the bunny, Relia couldn't stop trembling. The protagonist knew that she was not in danger at that moment, but she still couldn't calm down. She looked at the plush bunny and thought that at least no one would take it away from him. She bought the doll for Oscar so he could overcome his attacks. But in the end, she is the one who depends most on this bunny. The girl finally got out from under the blankets and decided to reflect on everything that had happened today. She noticed that during the conversation, that man called Elizabeth's sister. The heroine remembered that Elizabeth had several close relatives. Elizabeth came from the respected Superior aristocratic family, protectors of the empire's northwestern border. Apparently, the man had come to the capital to visit his nephews. Relia reflected on whether this man could help her if he knew the whole truth. Thinking about it, technically he was her uncle, and he could get her out of the tower as Elizabeth's daughter. But most likely the guy wouldn't believe the girl's words. After all, Not even her own father realized that she was his daughter. Fear began to overwhelm the young woman upon hearing the sound of footsteps. Approximately a minute later, her room door was kicked open. It wasn't Elizabeth's brother, but a man she deeply feared. Directly from the entrance, the man asked how the young woman knew about Elizabeth's cabin. The emperor was furious. He thought that Iris, his sister, had tipped off the protagonist. Perseus demanded an answer to his question, and he wanted it right now.